Chapter 180. Nie Xiao and the others, who had been teased by Zhang Xiaohua, were no longer in the mood to watch the competition in the arena. They stayed for a while longer before leaving. Zhang Xiaohua watched them stagger away and couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He thought to himself, "Did I go overboard?" The dazzling arena in Kitty Hawk Hall finally regained its calm. Leader Chong also heaved a sigh of relief. Steward Su must have seen the commotion in the morning. He didn't know if his handling was appropriate, if his response was steady, and if it could enter Steward Su's discerning eyes. The other children in the audience were very happy. Anyone who was surrounded by a group of people wouldn't feel good. Moreover, this group of people was their opponent's support group. Now it was good. The sky was high and the clouds were light. It was quiet, and they could concentrate on the competition. Putting aside Zhang Xiaohua's guilt, Leader Chang's nervousness, and the children's relaxation, when Nie Xiao and the others staggered out of Kitty Hawk Hall and turned at the intersection, they immediately straightened their backs. Someone said, "I didn't expect this Zhang Xiaohua to be so difficult to deal with now. I originally wanted to get some information out of him and make him leak some information. In the end, he was even more difficult to deal with than He Tianshu. Oldie just kept his mouth shut, but he used 3 words to exchange for 8 sets of sword techniques." Another person also said, "That's right. Zhang Xiaohua is no longer the same as before. He's no longer the country child we just met. That's right. The way he was bullied by Ma Jinger back then is still vivid in my mind. That's right. He also needs to grow and mature. If he still looks like he's being bullied, can he still survive in Jianghu? If he doesn't wash up early, it's better for him to go home and farm." That's true. However, after being played by this kid, I always feel uncomfortable. Brother Xiao, do we really have to each teach him a set of sword techniques? Nie Xiao nodded with a sinister smile on his face. He said, "Why not? We've already promised him. Why don't we teach him? Forget it. This is not the image of the wise second brother in our hearts. Hurry up and tell us, what good plan do you have?" Before Nie Xiao could say anything, he let out a complacent laugh, causing everyone's hearts to itch even more. Seeing everyone's anxious looks, Nie Xiao said slowly, "We said that we would teach Zhang Xiaohua swordsmanship, but we didn't say how. There are many ways to teach, and teaching by example is just one of them. Besides, with Zhang Xiaohua's comprehension, if he was still the same as before, he would forget 8 out of 10 moves you taught him. We would be exhausted to death. Also, we only talked about teaching him, but we didn't say that we have to teach him. I think there are 2 ways. First, he would practice 2 sets of swordsmanship in front of him. Who cared if he could learn it or not? The second was to find a few sword manuals and throw them to him so that he could read them by himself. This was also a way to teach martial arts. In short, he has a good plan and I have a way out. What can Zhang Xiaohua do to us?" Everyone clapped their hands and praised him. Only then did they happily puff out their chests and leave. Zhang Xiaohua from fledgling Eagle Hall did not know that he had been schemed against again. He was still secretly feeling guilty for going overboard. Alas, the older the ginger, the spicier it was. There was no need to deceive him. Zhang Xiaohua's remaining matches, to be honest, were really not worth mentioning. Although his opponents were different, his methods were the same. His guerrilla tactics were the same. Naturally, the results of the matches were the same. If it was not for the fact that he had to fight according to the rules, his opponents and Leader Chong would have discussed it with him and called it a draw. Why waste time? That incense was also a copper coin. It would be a pity to waste it. When Leader Chong announced a draw, Zhang Xiaohua and his opponent jumped down from the arena. Zhang Xiaohua's group's matches in the martial arts exhibition were considered to have ended. Zhang Xiaohua completed his journey in the martial arts exhibition with a record of 9 matches and 9 draws. Then, Leader Chong and Leader Li were copying and calculating something. The group of children beside them were anxiously staring at them. Zhang Xiaohua, who was bored to death, suddenly understood that this group of children were waiting for his match results. They had practiced martial arts hard for a few years and competed for 3 days with difficulty. Wasn't it all to pass this cotton-clothed first-rank test? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua felt a little uneasy. He had participated in this competition only to test himself. To put it bluntly, it was just for fun. However, would it affect one of these children because of his participation? If it affected someone, wouldn't it be very bad? At this time, Zhang Xiaohua also seemed to understand. On the first day, when the fledgling Eagle Hall's disciples had stared at him, they had some opinions in their eyes. However, when Zhang Xiaohua thought of his miserable record, he felt relieved. How could this kind of result block anyone's path? Not long after, Leader Chong stopped writing and picked up a piece of paper. He had a complicated expression on his face as he looked at the group of little faces in front of him. Then, he glanced at Zhang Xiaohua, who was slightly further away from him, with a strange expression. Only then did he open his mouth and say, "The results of this time's Commoner Cloak Rank 1 competition are out. There are 4 disciples who directly advanced to Commoner Cloak Rank 1. They are respectively." Subsequently, Leader Chong called out the names of the 4 disciples, including Mu Tangshun. When the names were called, the 4 people's faces immediately glowed with joy. The other disciples were unhappy and asked one after another, "Leader Chong, didn't 5 of our disciples directly break through? How come there are only 4? Leader Chong explained, "Every year the rule is that the 5 disciples who are ranked in the top 5 directly advance. But this year's 5th place." At this point, Leader Chong pointed to Zhang Xiaohua, who was standing in the distance, and said helplessly, "This 5th place is disciple number 250, Zhang Xiaohua, who came from Huanxi Manor to participate in our martial arts exhibition." Hearing this, the remaining disciples looked angrily at Zhang Xiaohua. If those gazes were replaced with swords, Zhang Xiaohua's body would immediately be pierced with numerous transparent holes. Even if he used ethereal steps, he would not be able to escape. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, it would be a lie to say that he was not happy. To be able to achieve such a result among this group of talented disciples really made him proud. It was also unexpected. But if it was because he took up one of the other people's advancement quota, that was also something that Zhang Xiaohua was unwilling to do. Seeing that the disciples wanted to vent their anger on Zhang Xiaohua, Leader Chong hurriedly said, "Although there are 4 people who directly advanced, according to the rules of the martial arts exhibition, we can recommend 2 disciples who have the strength of a commoner first stage to advance." Just now, I had a discussion with Leader Li. Considering the uniqueness of our group, we are prepared to recommend 3 disciples to make up for Zhang Xiaohua's direct advancement quota. When the disciples heard this, they cheered again. Zhang Xiaohua also showed a happy smile. Zhang Xiaohua walked in front of Leader Chong and prepared to salute and leave. He said, "Leader Chong, thank you for taking care of me these past few days. This martial arts exhibition is over. I should return to Huanxi Manor. I hope I can still come to participate in the competition next year." The disciples were dizzy and secretly said in their hearts, "This guy is really bad. He didn't cause enough trouble this year and is still thinking about next year. We must practice martial arts well and wait for next year to beat him until he is looking for his teeth on the ground." Leader Chong was very puzzled and asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, what do you mean by these words? You clearly passed the first stage. Listening to your tone, you want to return to Huanxi Manor and not participate in tomorrow's competition? There's still a competition tomorrow?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked, "Isn't the martial arts exhibition ending today? Our competition is over. What kind of competition is there tomorrow?" Only then did Leader Chong know that Zhang Xiaohua in front of him didn't seem to know the content of the martial arts exhibition. So he patiently explained to him, "Our Misty School's martial arts exhibition is divided into 3 stages. It is commonly known as the 3 stages. The first stage is the competition that you will participate in these 3 days. It is to win in the group competition and determine the rank of the disciples. For example, Mu Tangshun and the others are now rank 1 commoner. The second round will be decided by the winners of the first round. This round doesn't include the recommended disciples we just mentioned. They will compete in one-on-one matches to determine the top 10 disciples. These 10 disciples will receive special rewards. Then these 10 disciples will have the qualification to pass the 3rd stage. The 3rd stage is the challenge stage. These 10 disciples can challenge any disciple of the higher rank. If they win or draw, they will obtain a higher rank. This time, Zhang Xiaohua understood that he had just passed the first stage. He asked curiously, "Leader Chang, I only came to Huanxi Manor to participate in the martial arts exhibition. It has nothing to do with the advancement of your Misty School's disciples. Will I also participate in the next 2 stages?" Leader Chang nodded and said, "Ever since you participated in our group's competition, I specially checked the previous records. Although there hasn't been an outsider participating in the martial arts exhibition in the past few decades, there were still many outsiders who participated enthusiastically 100 years ago. Moreover, there are also many people who entered the second and third stages. However, there is one thing that I have seen in the records. These outsiders who advanced were mostly people with a certain amount of fame in the Jianghu. After joining the Lotus Escort Agency, they participated in the martial arts exhibition. Their martial arts skills were quite high, and their results, to be honest, were much better than yours." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and didn't deny his results, saying, "In other words, I have to participate in tomorrow's competition?" Leader Chang smiled and said, "Of course. Why else would I remind you? However, according to your results, it's fine if you don't participate. In the next 2 stages, the first stage is limited to the time it takes for 3 incense sticks to burn, and the other stage is unlimited. Your method of competition may not be advantageous anymore. In any case, you were able to pass the first stage, which is already not bad. I suggest that you don't need to pass the next 2 stages." That's right. The 2 disciples from the Lotus Escort Agency who came with you to participate in the martial arts exhibition have already withdrawn from the competition yesterday. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that there would be a competition tomorrow and didn't intend to compete with this group of children for a place. However, she had just received the pharmacy hall's token from He Tianshu this morning. If she didn't compete tomorrow, she would probably have to return it tonight. Thinking of the heaven and earth Yuan Qi in the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua was a little reluctant to part with it. Moreover, this Leader Chang was really too much. It's fine if you didn't tell me that there would be a competition tomorrow, but you first told me and then advised me not to participate. Isn't it just because my matches are always tied? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua was a little unhappy and asked, "Then, if I participate and enter the top 10, won't I take up another place in your Kitty Hawk Hall?" Leader Chang was very fond of Zhang Xiaohua asking this kind of question that didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It was a good opportunity to test his knowledge. He said, "No, it's recorded very clearly in the records. If you can enter the top 10, you will be given a place alone. Our Kitty Hawk Hall disciples will still choose 10 disciples." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she said resolutely, "Then I'll come back tomorrow to participate." "Oh." Leader Chang was a little surprised and said, "Are you sure?" Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, "Of course I'm sure. It doesn't matter if I lose. If I win, I can still compete with the commoner's second stage disciples. I won't lose anything, so why wouldn't I come?" When Leader Chang saw that Zhang Xiaohua had decided, he didn't try to persuade her anymore. He told her to come to Kitty Hawk Hall, as usual tomorrow. Only then did Zhang Xiaohua say goodbye and leave. After leaving Kitty Hawk Hall, Zhang Xiaohua's first thought was to go to the medicine hall. However, after thinking about it, her second brother was still in Misty School. She had no reason to go anywhere else first. She could only follow the original path back to Zhang Xiaohu's residence. The door to Zhang Xiaohu's small courtyard was still closed. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the door and knocked on it. When there was no response, she impatiently shouted, "Second brother, it's me." As expected, the door opened. Zhang Xiaohua walked in and said unhappily, "Second brother, do you have to close the door every day? If they keep coming to flatter you, are you going to close the door for the rest of your life?" At this moment, Zhang Xiaohu's face was covered in sweat. He wiped it slightly and said, I don't know either. I'll just close the door first. My martial arts are too inferior right now. I can't raise my head in front of others. I really don't have any better ideas, so I can only do this." Only then did Zhang Xiaohua notice that her second brother's head was covered in sweat. She asked in shock, "Second brother, why are you sweating so much? What are you doing?" What am I doing? Zhang Xiaohu bitterly smiled and walked to the empty space in the courtyard. He practiced the 6 harmonies fist technique that he was proficient in. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to disturb him. She sat on a small stone stool and watched quietly. However, after watching for a long time, Zhang Xiaohu struck again and again without stopping. His sweat flowed down like water. Zhang Xiaohua felt that something was wrong and shouted, second brother, stop and rest for a while." However, Zhang Xiaohu turned a deaf ear to her words. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, he became anxious. He jumped up from the small stone stool and jumped into the range of Zhang Xiaohu's moves. Using his left hand to block Zhang Xiaohu's fist, he used his right hand to execute the fist of the North Star and attacked Zhang Xiaohu's side. When Zhang Xiaohu saw his younger brother's fist close in, he didn't reply and swung his fist to meet it. Zhang Xiaohua didn't avoid the stiff collision. He felt that his second brother's fist was very heavy. It seemed like he was really going to use his full strength. How could Zhang Xiaohua be afraid? His hand also became heavier, so the two of them started fighting. After fighting for the time it took for 2 sticks of incense to burn, Zhang Xiaohua didn't feel that it was too strenuous. After all, his arms were very strong now. He didn't need to use any inner strength to punch. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohu was different. In the past, he had inner strength as a foundation, but now he had completely abandoned the low-level inner strength cultivation method. Now, he was relying on his physical strength to fight with Zhang Xiaohua. How could he be Zhang Xiaohua's opponent? If it wasn't for Zhang Xiaohua intentionally going easy on him, Zhang Xiaohu would have been knocked to the ground by his younger brother. Seeing that his second brother's fists weren't as heavy as they were at the beginning, and that his face was already showing signs of fatigue, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to continue fighting. He showed an opening under his armpit, just in time to meet Zhang Xiaohu's fist. With a pung sound, Zhang Xiaohua was sent flying. He cried out, "Ayo!" His cry of pain fell into Zhang Xiaohu's ears. He immediately stopped fighting and ran over to Zhang Xiaohua. He carefully helped him up and anxiously asked, "You're injured under your armpit, right? How is it? Does it hurt a lot?" When Zhang Xiaohua saw his second brother's anxious appearance, he secretly laughed in his heart. However, he didn't dare to reveal any flaws. He only furrowed his brows and said, "Second brother, I was kind enough to spar with you. How could you be so cruel? I'm your biological younger brother. Even if your martial arts are high, you shouldn't bully me like this. Ayo, it hurts." Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly smiled and said, "Xiaohua, it's all my fault. I'm in a bad mood today and wasn't careful. Take a deep breath and see if your chest is stuffy. If it's not, let's hurry to the medicine hall. I don't want to hurt you." Zhang Xiaohua deliberately took a deep breath and then exhaled. He closed his eyes for a while and said, "It's fine, second brother. It doesn't seem like my chest is uncomfortable. It's just that the place you hit hurts. AI, second brother, what's there to be in a bad mood about? You're being so cruel to your own younger brother. All right, you're sweating all over. Have you been practicing since this morning?" Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment and then silently nodded. Zhang Xiaohua touched his armpit and said, "Second brother, help me over. Let's sit on the stone bench and talk." Zhang Xiaohua looked hurt, so Zhang Xiaohu could only carefully help him over to the stone bench. After sitting down, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Second brother, I've been competing all day. Can you give me some water to drink?" When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he silently brought out a teacup and tea from the room. Zhang Xiaohua took it and poured out 2 cups of tea. She handed it to Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Second brother, you drink some too." Zhang Xiaohu looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "You drink too." When Zhang Xiaohua picked up the cup, Zhang Xiaohu drank it. Both of them drank the water and put down the cups. Zhang Xiaohua then asked, "Second brother, what's going on? Who told you to practice nonstop since you came back?" Zhang Xiaohu looked up at the sky and seemed to be thinking about something. Then he poured a cup of tea and said as he drank, "Actually, Little Blossom, it's nothing. It's just that I feel very useless. Look at you. You didn't have a master and you didn't learn the fist techniques completely, but you still persevered in practicing martial arts, and piece those incomplete fist techniques together. You actually succeeded in practicing them. Moreover, look at your current level of martial arts. Even the disciples of the ethereal sect aren't a match for you. You're much stronger than me. Please add it to your collection. Thank you. Chapter 181. Zhang Xiaohu really had a heavy burden on his mind. During his time in the Misty School, he was in a very difficult situation. Many of the righteous disciples thought that he had entered the Misty School through nepotism, so they treated him neither coldly nor warmly. Some even spoke ill of him. On the other hand, there were those who wanted to curry favor with him, which made him feel extremely disgusted. But even if he hated them, he had just entered the Misty School. He really didn't know where they came from, so he didn't dare to offend them. Therefore, his days in the Misty School were very difficult. He had no choice but to close the door. And these difficulties in dealing with people and relationships were just side effects for Zhang Xiaohu. The key was that after when Wen Hai brought him into the Misty School, he didn't care about him and just let him live and die on his own. They had met a few times before, and he had asked Zhang Xiaohua for the reckless bull force. Later on, they had distanced themselves from each other. Even if they did meet, he wouldn't talk about martial arts training. This made Zhang Xiaohu very puzzled, and he couldn't understand his master's thoughts. Time passed bit by bit, until today, when he saw Zhang Xiaohua show off his invincible might in the arena and fight evenly with the Misty School disciples. Zhang Xiaohu's mixed feelings were completely overturned. Zhang Xiaohu had always thought that he had good luck and was more talented than his younger brother, so he was ahead of him in the path of martial arts training. But today, he realized that he was wrong, very wrong. His younger brother had long since run ahead of him, leaving him far behind. He had an indescribable feeling in his heart. If one were to say that he was jealous, perhaps there was a little, but this was after all his younger brother by blood. Zhang Xiaohu saw his improvement and was mainly shocked and self-pitying. Thinking about his own situation, thinking about his stagnant martial arts, he seemed to feel a kind of suffocation. Yes, it was as if an invisible hand was choking his neck, making it hard for him to breathe. Zhang Xiaohu did not like this feeling. In order to vent his frustrations, he went back to the small courtyard and shut the door. He buried himself in hard practice, practicing the 6 harmony fists that he was best at. Only when he continuously practiced the 6 harmony fists like the palm of his hand did he have some confidence to comfort his hurt heart. As for the reason for his injury, Zhang Xiaohu had to admit from the bottom of his heart that it was really not because he saw that his younger brother's martial arts were stronger than his. It was because he felt from the bottom of his heart that his martial arts were too low. His character and appearance were ordinary. His background was lowly. He really could not take out anything that could catch the eye of that person. As such, how could he attract the attention of others? The more Zhang Xiaohu thought about it, the more his heart ached. And the more his heart ached, the more he couldn't stop his hands. He only stopped when Zhang Xiaohua knocked on the door and called him. His whole body was covered in sweat, as if he had just been fished out of the water. Zhang Xiaohu's reason was very far-fetched, but also very practical. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know how to answer him. If it was any ordinary martial arts, he would definitely pass it on to his second brother without hesitation. But what he had learned, other than the Big Dipper magical fist, were all from Misty School. Sect leader O had made it very clear that he couldn't pass it on to others and could only practice it himself. And what he relied on in the arena, other than the ethereal steps, was the Big Dipper magical fist and the strength of his 2 arms. To Zhang Xiaohu, these were things that couldn't be replicated. The Big Dipper magical fist wasn't the key to defeating the enemy, and it wasn't something that Zhang Xiaohu was willing to learn. He would rather practice his own Liu Hequan. Zhang Xiaohua sighed, not knowing how to comfort his second brother. Thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua was only a teenager. How could he have much experience for his older second brother to refer to? Thus, the 2 brothers could only drink their tea in silence. Zhang Xiaohua really wanted to tell his second brother that he had passed the 2nd stage of the martial arts exhibition. But if he told him this joyous news now, it would only hurt his pride again. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua could only be a taciturn gourd. While drinking tea, Zhang Xiaohu suddenly saw Zhang Xiaohua nimbly pick up the teacup with her right hand. His heart couldn't help but tremble, and he asked with a trembling voice, "Xiaohua, your right hand?" Zhang Xiaohua stared blankly. Looking at her hand that was holding the teacup, she suddenly understood and said with a smile, "Second brother, that's right. I haven't come to see you in this period of time. I forgot to tell you that my hand was basically healed last month. Look at me now." As she spoke, she nimbly moved her hand and said, "It's completely healed. I don't feel any discomfort at all. That's right, I even exchanged a punch with a fledgling Eagle Hall disciple today. There were no problems." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he was extremely happy. He didn't know if the gloominess just now was because he had vented out from the punch or because he had heard the news that Zhang Xiaohua's hand was healed, but it was dispelled. His mouth repeatedly said good, and the biggest stone in his heart was finally lifted. When he had heard the doctor of the Lotus Flower Escort Agency say that Zhang Xiaohua's right hand might be crippled in the future, there had always been a huge knot in his heart. He didn't know how his parents would feel if they knew this news, and how he would face them. Now, everything was fine. The dark night sky was actually so beautiful. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohu felt a bit guilty and said, "Xiaohua, you've already been healed for a month, but second brother only just saw. AI, second brother didn't take good care of you." If the two hadn't seen each other for a long time, Zhang Xiaohu wouldn't have paid attention. However, Zhang Xiaohua had just come over a month ago, and she had been with him for the past 2 days. He actually didn't see her. This was something that Zhang Xiaohu didn't want to forgive himself. However, Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "It's nothing, second brother. I've grown up and can take care of myself. You're not in an unfamiliar environment right now, so you should take care of yourself first. Looking at your appearance just now, it was really scary. You're not the same as when you were in the Lotus Flower Escort Agency. I remember that when you first learned the 6 he fists, you were very confident. You used this fist technique to compete with other people's bodyguards, and you never lost. Why are you so discouraged now?" The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener did. Zhang Xiaohu's heart moved when he heard this. That's right, back then he had nothing. He didn't have a master or a sect. He only had someone teach him the simple 6 he fists, and he could learn it with relish. Moreover, he was proficient in the 6 he fists and dared to challenge the strong. But today, he had already entered the Misty School and found the master that he had always dreamed of. There was a path to heaven in front of him. Although his master hadn't taught him anything, based on the foundation of the Misty School, even if they didn't teach him any secret techniques, it would definitely be 100 times better than the 6 he fists or the trash internal strength that he had cultivated. He felt sorry for himself because of a little neglect, blamed the heavens, and blamed others. He didn't even pay attention to his younger brother's injuries. Was such a Zhang Xiaohu still the same person? Could he cultivate to a high level of martial arts with such a mentality? Even if he cultivated to a high level of martial arts, could he still be happy? Moreover, if he only cared about himself and didn't care about others, would he be able to win someone's heart? A series of self-questioning caused Zhang Xiaohu's expression to constantly change. In the end, a smile appeared on Zhang Xiaohu's face. He had really thought it through. Whether it was martial arts or power, they were just a part of life. Family and friendship were the key to life. If he treated martial arts and power as his everything, then he would lose the joy of life. The true meaning of life was nothing more than enjoying life. Using martial arts and power as embellishments in life, whether others praised or belittled them, they shouldn't affect his magnanimous heart. Only in this way could he truly control his own life. Seeing Zhang Xiaohu smile, Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised. She asked, "Second brother, what are you thinking about? Why are you so happy?" Zhang Xiaohu still smiled and didn't say anything. He said, "It's nothing. It's just that when I thought about how your right hand has recovered, the stone in my heart also fell. I don't have to worry about you anymore." "Oh, right. How was the result of your competition today? Don't tell me it's still 3 draws. Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head embarrassedly. She said, "Second brother, can you think of another result?" Zhang Xiaohu chuckled and asked, "Then you're not going back to Huanxi Mountain Villa today, right? Are you going back early tomorrow morning?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled mysteriously. She said, "You guessed wrong, oh?" Zhang Xiaohu was surprised. He looked up at the sky and said, "It's already late. It's not appropriate for you to go back now." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head again. Zhang Xiaohu was puzzled. He said, "Are you going to go back tomorrow night?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "Guess again." Zhang Xiaohu said, "It's up to you to say it or not. Anyway, this is where I live. I don't need to leave. If you have the ability, you can also live here." Zhang Xiaohua chuckled. She said, "Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? Or do you not believe that your dearest little brother can enter the second round of the martial arts exhibition?" The second round of the martial arts exhibition? Zhang Xiaohu opened his mouth wide and asked in surprise, "I really don't know. Moreover, is what you said true? You entered the second round? With your 9 fights and 9 draws?" Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and said embarrassedly, "I don't know what the other people's results were. However, Leader Chang told me that I was the last person to enter the second round." Zhang Xiaohu said excitedly, "Even if you're the last person, you're still the best of fledgling Eagle Hall. Xiaohua, you're really stronger than me now." This sentence was said with sincerity, and it did not make Zhang Xiaohua feel as gloomy as he did earlier. Then, Zhang Xiaohua told Zhang Xiaohu about the second round of the martial arts exhibition that Leader Chang had told her. After listening, Zhang Xiaohu closed his door and thought for a while. He said, "Xiaohua, I reckon that the second round will not be as easy to pass as the first round. Not to mention that the disciples who entered the second round are all outstanding. Every one of them has a higher cultivation than you. Moreover, the time it takes for 2 incense sticks to burn is enough for them to use different techniques to attack you and test you. Don't forget, which one of these disciples doesn't have a unique skill? It's not like the first round, which only has the time it takes for 1 incense stick to burn. Moreover, the second round only has an elimination system. There are no draws. It seems that your strategy of shrinking back in the first round is not working." Zhang Xiaohua was not annoyed. She said, "I'm not as good as them. I've always admitted this. I was lucky to be able to enter the second round. Finally, I can stay in the Misty School for a while. It's also good to be with you." Zhang Xiaohu put down his teacup and said, "You just want to see the level of the others in the second round. Why do you have to drag me in? If you want to see me, you could just come. As long as you have the Huan Shi Villa token, the gate of Misty Mountain Villa won't stop you. It's not like the pharmacy hall, where you need the hall master's token." "Io." Zhang Xiaohua thought of something and slapped her forehead. "What's wrong?" Zhang Xiaohu was very puzzled. Zhang Xiaohua took out the token from He Tianshu and explained, "I got the token from Captain He. I was going to harass him tonight. I didn't expect to meet you like this. Looking at the time, it's too late to go there. You still want to go to the pharmacy hall?" Zhang Xiaohu was puzzled. "There's a strong smell of herbs there. There's nothing good there. Why do you want to go there? I think there's more qi in the pharmacy hall." Zhang Xiaohua did not hide it. "Qi? In the pharmacy hall?" Zhang Xiaohu was even more puzzled. He said, "Regulating breath and practicing qi is the same everywhere, as long as it's a quiet environment, right?" Zhang Xiaohua also scratched his head and said, "Who knows? Anyway, I think every place is different." Zhang Xiaohu shook his head and said, "It's your state of mind that's different." This was quite philosophical. However, Zhang Xiaohua did not think so much because he did experience different qi of heaven and earth. Zhang Xiaohu saw that his brother did not speak and thought that he was right. After all, he was a young man. How could he have the same state of mind as before when he just came into contact with internal strength? The 2 brothers chatted for a while before preparing to rest. Zhang Xiaohu was worried and asked, "Xiaohua, does your armpit still hurt?" Zhang Xiaohua patted his body and said, "It's fine. It's already healed." Zhang Xiaohu was finally relieved. After entering the room, Zhang Xiaohu originally wanted to sleep side by side like the day before. However, Zhang Xiaohua thought and said, "Second brother, I'll stay in another room. I want to regulate my breath and practice at night. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohu happily said, "Okay, then don't practice too late. There's a competition tomorrow." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and agreed. They went back to their rooms. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and turned the 5 hearts to the sky. He began to practice the Heart Sutra and began to draw qi into his body. When Zhang Xiaohua released his perception, he found that the qi of heaven and earth in Zhang Xiaohu's residence was not as much as in the pharmacy hall. However, it was a little more than the medicine field in Huanqi Villa. It was exactly as Zhang Xiaohua said. The qi of heaven and earth was different in every place. Obviously, the qi of heaven and earth in Ethereal Villa was a little richer than in Huanqi Villa. The night's practice passed quickly. When it was dawn again, Zhang Xiaohua checked the Jinqi in his meridians. There was still no obvious change. However, this was not beyond Zhang Xiaohua's expectation. Outside the room, the two brothers were in good spirits. Zhang Xiaohu also completely got rid of yesterday's decadence, making people feel as if he was a different person. Zhang Xiaohua was also completely relieved. Zhang Xiaohua asked, "Second brother, will you still accompany me to the competition today?" Zhang Xiaohu patted him on the shoulder and said, "Of course, why not?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled happily. The two brothers arrived at Kitty Hawk Hall together. The number of arenas in the square had not decreased, and the number of disciples below the arenas had not decreased. However, many of the disciples had excited smiles on their faces and were talking to each other. After watching the second round of the competition, many of them did not have much of a psychological burden. It was not like the first round, where the results of the competition were related to whether they could advance or not. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu came to the fighting ring where the competition took place a few days ago. Not long after, they saw Leader Chong come over with a smile and greet the disciples below the ring. Then, he took out a few number plates and distributed them to the disciples who entered the second round. When Zhang Xiaohua received the number plates, he could not help but be surprised. He pulled on Leader Chang's sleeve and asked, "Leader Chong, did you give the wrong number? Why am I still number 250? Leader Chong looked at the unpleasant number and said with a smile, "There's no mistake. You got 9 points from 9 battles and 9 draws. Among the 250 disciples, you are ranked last. If you don't take this number plate, who will take it?" Zhang Xiaohua looked helplessly at the number plate that had accompanied him for 3 days. He rubbed it hard on his body and hugged it. Then he asked, "Leader Chong, where will I compete? Will it still be in our fighting ring?" Leader Chong shook his head and said, "No, this second round is an elimination system. It's not fixed in the same fighting ring. Listen to the number plates. Wherever they tell you to go, you will go." Zhang Xiaohua nodded. Not long after, the second round of the competition began. Zhang Xiaohua thought that his number plate was the last and would be the same as the first round. The competition would be at the end. But just as it began, someone shouted, "Number 250, 250, where is it?" Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua did not respond, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly raised his hand and said, "Here." The person on the other side shouted, "Quickly, this fighting ring. The competition is about to begin." Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly ran over and asked loudly, "Isn't it the last number? Why is the competition starting now?" The leader of the fighting ring sneered, "This is an elimination system, not a round-robin system. It is arranged according to the number plate to prevent disciples of similar strength from meeting each other first. For disciples like you who are slightly weaker, they will first compete with disciples who are slightly stronger. Some will be eliminated first, and the truly powerful disciples will stay at the end to fight for the top 10. Oh, so it's like that. Zhang Xiaohua understood a little. His point from the first round were there. He was the weakest, so what else could he say? After the leader finished speaking, he pointed to the fighting ring and said to Zhang Xiaohua and another disciple, "Go up. I'll go light the incense. The competition is about to begin." When the disciple heard this, he took 2 steps forward and used his qigong. He flew up the stage like a swallow. Zhang Xiaohua looked left and right, as if he was looking for something. The leader glared at him and said, "Why aren't you going up? Do you want me to throw you up?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he was overjoyed. He smiled and said, "Great, then please throw me up." Chapter 182. The leader looked at Zhang Xiaohua as though he was looking at a monster and muttered, "What an idiot." Then he said angrily, "Are you going up or not?" At this moment, a voice came from behind. "Of course I'm going up." Zhang Xiaohua turned around and was overjoyed. It was really Zhang Xiaohu who was rushing over with a ladder on his back. The leader stared blankly as Zhang Xiaohu ran to the front of the stage and leaned the ladder against the side of the stage. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and nodded at the leader. She walked to the front of the ladder and walked up to the stage. When Zhang Xiaohua walked up to the stage, the leader came to his senses. He pointed at the ladder leaning against the stage and couldn't believe his eyes. He stuttered, this, in his hurry. He didn't know what he was saying. It was no wonder. Ever since he entered the Misty School, participated in the martial arts exhibition, and became the leader of the Misty School, he had never seen a Misty School disciple walk up to the stage using the ladder. The word ladder didn't exist in the minds of the Misty School disciples. The disciple on the stage also looked at everything that was happening below the stage strangely. When Zhang Xiaohua really stood in front of him, he suddenly came to a realization. He pointed at Zhang Xiaohua's nose and said, You don't know Qigong? Zhang Xiaohua nodded solemnly and said in all seriousness, "Yes, I haven't learned Qigong yet." The disciple's lips curled into a contemptuous smile. After the two of them greeted each other, without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to prepare, the disciple rushed forward and attacked with his fist. Zhang Xiaohua was also shocked. She even forgot to use the ethereal steps and only knew to raise her fist to meet the attack. A few days ago, in the first 9 matches of the martial arts exhibition, Zhang Xiaohua usually used the fist of the Big Dipper to attack and ethereal steps to dodge. Therefore, it was always a draw. But today, she was caught off guard by her opponent's attack. She naturally reacted by using the fist of the Big Dipper that she was most familiar with. The fist of the Big Dipper only had 36 defensive moves. In the past, Zhang Xiaohua felt that there weren't many defensive moves. Ever since she learned the ethereal steps, most of her defensive moves were dodging using the ethereal steps. But this time, she was forced to only use the fist of the Big Dipper. Only after half an instance's time did Zhang Xiaohua wake up from her opponent's continuous attacks. Just as she was about to slide and use the ethereal steps, a thought suddenly appeared in her mind. If she only used the fist of the Big Dipper, how long could she last? Zhang Xiaohua wanted to know the difference between her fist of the Big Dipper and other people's fist techniques. Therefore, she abandoned the ethereal steps and focused on using the fist of the Big Dipper. A person's potential was forced out. In the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua was clumsy left and right. She blocked left and right and was very passive. She could only counterattack once in 10 moves. There were a few times when she was hit by her opponent's rough skin and flesh. She almost fell down. There was a time when she almost fell off the stage. When the disciple saw that his attacks were effective, he put in more effort in his attacks. He wasn't stingy with his internal energy. After half an incense stick's time, Zhang Xiaohua gradually adapted to her opponent's attacks. Gradually, she began to counterattack. The fist of the Big Dipper originally had many offensive moves. In the past few days, her opponents had avoided her and didn't show the power of the fist of the Big Dipper. Her opponent's attacks in this incense stick's time was like a baptism for her fist technique. It allowed Zhang Xiaohua to grow. Her strength and moves became more coordinated and subtle. In the past, Zhang Xiaohua did not know the difference between a competition and practice. He only put himself at the end of the practice in the competition and did not know how to control his strength. When he attacked, most of his strength hit empty air, and his fist was full of vigor, but it could not do anything to his opponent. But today, in the competition, the sound of the wind on Zhang Xiaohua's fist was getting smaller and smaller, and his strength was gradually restrained. At the same time, because Zhang Xiaohua's control of his strength had become more and more precise, the situation when he collided with his opponent had also changed. Previously, Zhang Xiaohua only relied on his strength, and many of his attacks missed. The opponent's internal strength on his fist could easily attack Zhang Xiaohua's fist, forcing Zhang Xiaohua to have no choice but to dodge. But now his strength was also controlled inside his fist, and he was able to resist his opponent's internal strength. It was as if he had built a dam in his fist or meridians, firmly preventing the internal strength from invading. This was only one aspect. In addition, in the competition, Zhang Xiaohua didn't use many moves of the Fist of the North Star. The changes between the moves were very obscure. After all, Zhang Xiaohua only practiced the Fist of the North Star from beginning to end in a set. Her experience in fighting against her opponent was still very little. But today's baptism really helped Zhang Xiaohua. The changes in the moves of the Fist of the North Star gradually became smoother and smoother. Various kinds of moves were constantly at her fingertips. Although there were constantly repetitive moves, even these repetitive moves had different uses. They were far more powerful than a few days ago. The leader below the stage was also slightly surprised. Zhang Xiaohua's result was the worst in the second round. Her opponent's standard was average. He originally thought that Zhang Xiaohua would be able to last for an incense stick's worth of time. But seeing that the second incense stick was already half burnt, Zhang Xiaohua became braver and braver as the battle went on, gradually turning the situation around. The one who was the most surprised was Zhang Xiaohu. After all, he understood Zhang Xiaohua the most. Moreover, he had been watching Zhang Xiaohua's matches for the past few days. At the beginning, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was beaten silly by her opponent, she actually forgot her specialty, ethereal steps. He was secretly worried that if she wasn't careful, Zhang Xiaohua would be kicked off the stage by her opponent. He secretly prayed in his heart that she should hurry up and use the ethereal steps. Hurry up and use the ethereal steps. Hurry up and use the ethereal steps. However, Zhang Xiaohua's performance was beyond his expectations. Not only did she not use the ethereal steps, she only used the Fist of the North Star to face her opponent. Just like a bamboo in a rainstorm, no matter how heavy the rain was, it could only slightly bend her waist. As long as the rain did not decrease, she would immediately straighten her back. Although Zhang Xiaohu was not an internal force expert, his understanding of fist techniques was far greater than Zhang Xiaohua's. He gradually became more familiar with fist techniques. Gradually, he began to understand. His sharp senses felt that Zhang Xiaohua's control of the Fist of the North Star was becoming more and more precise. Zhang Xiaohu could not help but nod his head. Battles were indeed the best way to grow. On the stage, Zhang Xiaohua's opponent became more and more alarmed as he fought. The situation of the battle was beginning to spiral out of his control. Moreover, the inner force in his body was almost exhausted. After all, he was only a disciple of the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall. He had just attained the first rank of Cotton Robe. So how could he have any profound inner force? He stole a glance at the second incense stick under the stage. It was already more than half. Thinking about how he had spent so much time facing his worst opponent, how would he face his future opponents? Moreover, he also noticed that Zhang Xiaohua's fists were beginning to slow down. Her forehead was also covered in sweat. He knew that Zhang Xiaohua was also at the end of her tether and was gradually losing her strength. In fact, when comparing inner force to physical strength, inner force naturally had the upper hand. Not only was there a lot of techniques in the use of inner force, it could be used to attack flexibly, but physical strength could only be controlled. Inner force could be tempered through the veins, the deeper it became, but physical strength was not easy to increase. Most importantly, inner force could be quickly recovered through the regulation of inner force cultivation methods, but physical strength recovery was not easy. At this moment, he could not help but regret. If he had put in more effort to cultivate his inner force, Zhang Xiaohua would have run out of strength, and he would have been able to win easily. Just as he was thinking, he had forced Zhang Xiaohua into a corner. Zhang Xiaohua was also gasping for air, as if she was about to sit on the ground. Thus, he was delighted. He took a deep breath and secretly channeled the last bit of inner force in his veins. With a wave of his hands, he covered Zhang Xiaohua's body with his palms and attacked Zhang Xiaohua. He believed that in such a small corner, whether it was attacking or defending, Zhang Xiaohua would inevitably come into contact with his palms. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's appearance, his last bit of inner force should be the straw that broke the camel's back. He looked forward to the clash of fists and palms, as if he could already see the dawn of victory. Moreover, just as his palms were about to hit Zhang Xiaohua, he suddenly felt his vision blur, and he had actually lost sight of Zhang Xiaohua's figure. But he had already used up all his inner force, and his inner force hit empty air. His body was already out of control. He had already forced Zhang Xiaohua to the corner of the stage, and when he reached the edge of the stage, when Zhang Xiaohua dodged, he had already reached the edge of the stage. The forward momentum brought him out of the stage, and he cursed in his heart. He immediately gathered his qi and wanted to use his qin gong to return to the stage. But now, his meridians were like a thief leaving a building, empty. There was not an ounce of inner force that he could use. He could only watch helplessly as he fell off the stage. He heard two plop, plop sounds, and Zhang Xiaohua's opponent had thrown himself off the stage. As for Zhang Xiaohua, she had also used up all her strength and sat down on the stage. It was a close call just now. Her opponent had used all his might, and Zhang Xiaohua indeed did not have any extra strength to block it. Unfortunately, although Zhang Xiaohua's strength was not enough to block that palm, which was filled with inner force, she was still able to use ethereal steps. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua used the last of her strength and used ethereal steps to flash behind her opponent. At this moment, below the stage, the second incense stick had just been extinguished. The leader looked at the two people who had fallen off the stage and announced, "Number 250 wins." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he happily ran to the side of the stage. Zhang Xiaohua, who was on the stage, was also unusually excited, but he raised his hand with great difficulty and still stood up weakly. Zhang Xiaohu walked along the escalator and carried Zhang Xiaohua down with a pained heart. He brought her to the side to rest. Luckily, there was still some time before the second round of the competition, and they could let the competing disciples rest. Otherwise, with Zhang Xiaohua's condition, she could only admit defeat. As mentioned previously, the recovery of inner force was through regulating one's breathing. At this moment, there were quite a number of contestants who were sitting cross-legged. They were using this gap in the competition to quickly circulate their inner force to recover as much inner force as possible. As for Zhang Xiaohua, seeing that others were regulating their breathing, Zhang Xiaohu said to Zhang Xiaohua, who was sitting on the ground paralyzed, "Xiaohua, you don't have any strength left. What are you going to do next? Why don't you rest here and I'll go see where you are competing? We'll just admit defeat. Anyway, you have already won a match just now, and it has long exceeded our expectations. I thought you would be beaten down in half an incense stick's time." Zhang Xiaohua tried her best to move her legs and said, "Wait a little longer. Let's see how much strength I can recover." Zhang Xiaohua could feel that her strength was slowly recovering, but this speed was far from enough. She estimated that by the time the other party finished regulating their breathing and was ready to go on stage, her strength would not even be half recovered. What should she do? Just as he was panicking, his mind lit up as he thought of something. He struggled to help Zhang Xiaohu stand up and slowly took up the horse stance. He slowly began to execute the Big Dipper mystical fist. Zhang Xiaohu was stunned and quickly stopped him. "What are you doing? Xiaohua, you're already so tired. Why don't you rest more and try to recover more strength? Why are you still practicing the fist technique?" Zhang Xiaohua said weakly, "Second brother, don't worry about me. I think this will help me recover my strength." It turned out that Zhang Xiaohua wanted to use the usual method of practicing the Fist of the North Star to recover her strength. However, on one hand, Zhang Xiaohua had never used this method to recover her strength before, so she did not know if it would work. On the other hand, she had just practiced the Fist of the North Star to the third level and needed 7 consecutive times to flow. In this short period of time, she did not know if it was enough for her to finish 7 times. In any case, if she simply waited here, she would definitely not be able to recover her strength and would only end up admitting defeat. But if she practiced the Fist of the North Star, there might be a glimmer of hope. For this glimmer of hope, Zhang Xiaohua was willing to gamble. Seeing that all the disciples who were regulating their breathing had stood up and walked towards the arena, the people in the arena had also started calling out numbers. Zhang Xiaohua had just slowly practiced the second round. When Zhang Xiaohua was about to perform the last move of the second round, a shout came from the arena. Number 250, number 250? Zhang Xiaohua wanted to give up, but Zhang Xiaohu also shouted from the side, "Xiaohua, they've already called you." Zhang Xiaohua gritted his teeth and said, "Second brother, go and delay for a while." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he looked at him, then looked at the arena, and hurriedly ran over. However, Zhang Xiaohua was already in despair. It was still far from the seventh round. How could second brother delay for so long? However, Zhang Xiaohua did not want to give up. He gritted his teeth and started practicing the Fist of the North Star for the third time. However, when he performed the first move, that familiar, longing and long-awaited life-saving flow was produced from his left toe. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He immediately produced a kind of power from his body. He used all his strength to practice the Fist of the North Star, driving the flow throughout his bones. The flow was like a nourishing elixir. Every time it flowed through a bone, it would drive the flesh and muscles connected to the bone, restoring their vitality. After a total of 108 moves were completed, Zhang Xiaohua had recovered all the strength in his body. Moreover, he could faintly feel that his flesh and blood were filled with vitality, as if his strength had increased by a bit. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be greatly puzzled. Could this be the legendary break and then rebuild? However, at this time, there was no time left for him to think. He quickly ran into the arena. That nimble figure of his was not the same as the one who was paralyzed on the ground half a moment ago. When Zhang Xiaohua ran to the arena where a quarrel was going on, Zhang Xiaohu was carrying Fu Tai and begging the leader. The leader did not buy it and said, "I don't care if you're the sect leader's direct disciple or not. Even the sect leader himself has to abide by the rules of the martial arts exhibition. I've already waited half a minute, and now it's time. Now please move aside. I want to announce that the number 250 disciple has forfeited." Zhang Xiaohu pulled the leader's sleeve and said something. Zhang Xiaohua loudly shouted, "Second brother, I'm here." Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly said to the leader, "Okay, my little brother is here. There's no need to announce that he has forfeited." The leader looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who ran in front of him, and asked, "Where did you go? It's already time. You're looking down on the rules of the martial arts exhibition." Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly scowled and said, "Leader, I ate too much yesterday. I need to go to the toilet. I need to go to the toilet. Please forgive me." The leader laughed out loud. "Just now your second brother said you used up all your strength and needed a rest. You said need to go to the toilet. Which one do I believe?" Zhang Xiaohua rubbed his hands and said, "I believe all of them. I believe all of them." The leader smiled and waved his hand. "Fortunately, you haven't exceeded the time limit. Otherwise, even if I believe all of them, you would still forfeit. Hurry up and go up. If you don't go up, I will really consider you as the loser." Hearing this, the first to move was not Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohu quickly ran to the front of the arena. He first placed the escalator on the side of the arena. Only then did Zhang Xiaohua quickly walk up the arena. The leader and Zhang Xiaohua's opponent cursed again. What kind of contestants were these? The contestants who entered the second round could be said to be the best of the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall. They were outstanding in all aspects such as internal energy, qigong, fist techniques, palm techniques, and so on. They were even extremely experienced in competition. As a result, Zhang Xiaohua's second-round contestant had not fought with Zhang Xiaohua for more than half an incense stick's worth of time. She took the initiative to attack, passively defend, and then constantly wandered around. She had changed several battle strategies. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua had tasted the sweetness of going on the offensive. He only blindly attacked. Every move was forward, and every punch was aimed at the flesh. Although Zhang Xiaohua was still on the offensive this time, it was different from the previous time. As he fought, he tried different ways to control his strength and combined real moves with feints. The previous tough fight had really benefited him a lot, as he had tried the essence of the fight. Now, he was constantly improving, and he was able to handle it with ease. It was still the same 108 moves, but now it had turned something rotten into something magical, and the repeated moves were also ingenious. For a while, he was evenly matched with the opponent who was above average in strength, and even seemed to have the upper hand. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent was in a predicament. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua's number plate, he naturally knew that she was the worst disciple in the second round today. Moreover, she was walking on the escalator. She did not even know Qinggong, yet she was able to enter the second round. This was an anomaly. When they started fighting, he attacked, while Zhang Xiaohua defended freely. When he relaxed a little, Zhang Xiaohua attacked like rain, making him feel that he could not withstand it. Also, Zhang Xiaohua's fists were very heavy. With one look, one could tell that she was a master of great strength. Naturally, he would not easily fight her head-on. Therefore, he wandered around again, attempting to use the weakness of Zhang Xiaohua's lack of Qinggong to exhaust Zhang Xiaohua's strength. When they fought until the end, when Zhang Xiaohua was exhausted, he would deal the fatal blow. Please add it to your collection. Thank you. Chapter 183. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent. That little abacus was loud and clear. A person's strength was sometimes exhausted and naturally could not last long. Zhang Xiaohua was naturally no exception. However, this endurance was different from person to person. Zhang Xiaohua's previous match was because she had used too much strength at the beginning. In the end, she almost died. In this match, naturally, she was very careful in the distribution of strength. Seeing that the opponent was blindly wandering, she used even more feints. From the beginning of the match, there were 7 real moves and 3 feints. Later on, there were 7 feints and 3 real moves. In the end, there were 10 feints. Since you are not attacking, why should I go all out? In addition, Zhang Xiaohua had just practiced the Big Dipper magical fist. Her body was full of strength and was stronger than when she first went on stage. How could this kind of state be exhausted in 2 or 3 incense sticks? Thus, on the stage, there was a scene that made Zhang Xiaohua incredulous. Zhang Xiaohua actually chased her opponent around the stage. Although people with discerning eyes could see clearly that this was called a wandering tactic, like a swallow shuttling back and forth on the stage, avoiding Zhang Xiaohua's fists. Her figure was also beautiful, but after all, she was defending. Her momentum was weaker, and the situation was not good. Zhang Xiaohua did not show off her Qinggong footwork. Compared to her opponent, she was clumsy. However, she seemed to be unskilled and had a valiant taste. In this way, the two of them fought as they walked. As they walked, they fought for nearly an incense stick's worth of time. Although Qinggong did not require much internal strength, it still consumed internal strength. Otherwise, Zhang Xiaohua would have practiced Qinggong long ago. After an incense stick's worth of time, the disciple who was competing with Zhang Xiaohua was already sweating on his back. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua was also panting heavily. The disciple was happy when he saw this. His strategy had begun to work, and Zhang Xiaohua had expended a lot of energy. Originally, when the disciple saw that more than half the time had passed, he thought that if his strategy didn't have any obvious effect, he would change his method of attack. However, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua's footsteps had slowed down, he couldn't help but feel happy. He took a deep breath and circulated the internal energy in his meridians. His body became even faster and he continued to move. He firmly believed that Zhang Xiaohua could only hold on for half an incense stick of time. When Zhang Xiaohua ran out of strength, it would be the time for him to pick the fruits of victory. Sure enough, Zhang Xiaohua did not disappoint. Her footsteps became heavier and her breathing became heavier. The disciple patiently waited for half an incense stick's worth of time. When he calculated that it was about time, he let out a long whistle and stopped his flying steps. He laughed and said, "Idiot, you've been fooled. Watch me." After saying that, He turned around and leaped up. His left and right legs kept changing, alternating between kicking at Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she grinned, revealing her white teeth. Her footsteps no longer moved. Her legs were slightly separated, and she lowered her waist. She was actually in a horse stance. She raised her fist and punched towards the shadow of a leg that was flying towards her. Pung, pung, pung. There were a few consecutive sounds like the sound of leather being beaten. The shadow of the leg that was filled with internal energy collided with Zhang Xiaohua's fist that was filled with strength. Zhang Xiaohua's body was as steady as a mountain. She didn't move at all. The shadow of the leg was like flowing water that hit a pillar. After several impacts, it didn't have any effect. When the disciple retracted his body and stood firmly on the spot, his legs couldn't help but tremble slightly. He actually felt pain in his legs. On the opposite side, Zhang Xiaohua also loosened her fists and swung her hands. It should be the same feeling as her opponent. The disciple looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said in surprise, "You still have the strength to receive my shadowless kick? You didn't use much strength just now?" Zhang Xiaohua chuckled. Her face looked harmless and said, "You guess? You guess. Why don't you guess?" After speaking, she didn't wait for the disciple to reply. She leaned forward and raised her fist to attack the disciple's chest. The disciple thought it was a feint and wanted to dodge. But when the fist got close to him, it contained strength, and the wind from the fist was biting cold. The disciple's face changed, and he immediately raised his palm to meet the fist. When the fist and palm met, his body swayed. Only then did he know that Zhang Xiaohua had used all her strength. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that her fist was blocked, she didn't stop. She closed in with another move, forcing the disciple to immediately receive the attack. He couldn't even move. The disciple made a move, and every move fell behind. Zhang Xiaohua also took advantage of her strength to bully others. She pressed forward with her fists, forcing the disciple to use all his strength to deal with each move. Zhang Xiaohua's fist technique had been honed over this period of time, and was no longer as inexperienced as before. Even if Nie Xiao were to fight now, he would not be a match for Zhang Xiaohua just by relying on his previous 4 ounces against 1,000 jin. Furthermore, this disciple's internal energy was even more incomparable to Nie Xiao's. Zhang Xiaohua's arms now had an unknown amount of strength, but it was enough to deal with him. Therefore, in the last half an incense stick's time, the disciple was really suppressed by Zhang Xiaohua. He couldn't even take half a move. The disciple was angry. He thought that he had set a trap for Zhang Xiaohua to jump into, but he didn't know that Zhang Xiaohua would beat him at his own game. Instead, he fell into his trap. The 36 stratagems, he still hadn't studied them thoroughly. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was proudly attacking and enjoying the pleasure of her plan, her opponent was endlessly regretting and had to use all his strength to deal with her. Then, she heard a shout from below the stage. "Time's up. Stop." Zhang Xiaohua immediately jumped up in joy and shouted to Zhang Xiaohu below the stage, "Second brother, another draw, another draw." But that disciple's face was ashen as he hung his head dejectedly. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was satisfied with this draw and was about to walk down the stage, the leader below the stage announced, "Number 250 wins." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked in shock, "Leader, wasn't there a draw? So I'm the winner?" That leader didn't have time to waste on her and waved his hand, saying, "I said you won, so you won. What's with all this nonsense? Why aren't you going to rest and prepare for the next round of competition?" After saying that, he called for another pair of contestants to go up the stage to compete. Zhang Xiaohua resentfully jumped down the stage and pulled a youth who was watching from the side. She heartlessly asked, "This brother, how do you think I won?" That youth coldly asked, "What's your surname?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and said, "My surname is Zhang." Then she asked, "What does this have to do with my victory?" That youth said, "It has nothing to do with your victory or defeat, but my surname is not Zhang. Please don't call me brother. It won't be too late for you to call me that when my surname is Zhang in my next life." Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but silently criticize. Why are the children these days all like this? Rebellious, generation gap. My surname might not even be Zhang in my next life. Then she smiled mischievously and said, "Let's not talk about names first. Can you tell me why I won?" That youth looked at her with disdain and said, "Actually, your martial arts might not be as good as Senior Gao's." "Oh," Zhang Xiaohua said, "it's the one who fought with me just now." That youth was surprised. "When you were bowing just now, he didn't say anything?" Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and said, "Maybe, I forgot." That youth was even more annoyed and said, "Senior Gao knows that you don't know Qin Gong and internal energy, so he wanted to first exhaust your strength. When you're out of strength, then he'll deal with you. Unfortunately, he miscalculated and didn't exhaust your strength. On the contrary, he was the one who first fought with you, then was suppressed by you and fell into a disadvantageous position. If he fought with all his strength from the beginning, the outcome might not be known, but at least he wouldn't be at a disadvantage and be judged as a failure by the leader." Zhang Xiaohua was even more confused and said, "It's clearly a draw. Why did you say it was a failure?" That youth frowned and said, "Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? The second round of the martial arts exhibition is an elimination system. There's only victory and defeat, no draws. If there's no winner after 2 incense sticks of time, then the disadvantaged disciple on the stage will be judged as the loser." Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that there was such a rule. That youth continued to explain, "Senior Gao fought with you in the beginning, so it couldn't be considered a disadvantage. As long as he defeated you, this wouldn't be a problem. But in the end, he was suppressed by you. His fighting with you in the beginning proved that he was passive. In the end, it was a draw, so naturally you were judged as the winner. You're very lucky. Don't be beaten badly when you practice martial arts." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she looked up to the sky and laughed, saying, "Ha ha! Character is a problem." When that youth saw this, he hurriedly took a few steps away with an expression that said, "I don't know him." Zhang Xiaohu was also listening to the side. He smiled and congratulated Zhang Xiaohua. "Xiaohua, congratulations, you're really lucky to pass another round." Zhang Xiaohua stopped laughing and said to Zhang Xiao, "Let's go, second brother. Let's rest on the side. There's still a competition later." Thus, the 2 brothers returned to the previous place. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua sit down, Zhang Xiaohu was a bit puzzled and asked, "Xiaohua, you're not using your Big Dipper magical fist anymore?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Second brother, I'm not tired at all. After a little rest, I'll be able to recover my strength. Just now, don't think that I was forcing him to fight on the stage. I only used my strength in the last few moments. At the very beginning, I was just using my flowery frame to fool him." At this time, they heard a dang sound from the side. Zhang Xiaohua and his brother turned around to look. Wasn't it the disciple who was fighting with Zhang Xiaohua on the stage? He must have heard Zhang Xiaohua's words and fainted on the ground. The 2 brothers stayed outside the stage, chatting while paying attention to the movements inside the stage. After a while, the competition inside the stage ended. Many disciples also came over to sit down and rest, adjusting their internal strength. After another period of time, the 3rd round of the competition began. As a number was called, the disciples outside the stage gradually walked into the stage. However, Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu did not hear the unpleasant number being called. Even after a long time had passed, Zhang Xiaohua and the others did not hear it. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua shouted, "Oh no, second brother, this competition will be considered as forfeiting if we don't see it." Could it be that we didn't hear it? Don't lose the opportunity for nothing. Zhang Xiaohu was also anxious and said, "I didn't hear it either. I guess we missed it. Let's quickly go in and look for it." However, on the stage, there seemed to be a competition and no one was waiting for anyone. Zhang Xiaohua was anxious and said, "Second brother, it seems that we really missed it. They didn't wait for us at all. Sigh, it wasn't easy to enter the 3rd round. Why did we forfeit? I don't know who benefited from it." Zhang Xiaohu said, "But we also paid attention. We really didn't hear the number 250 being called. This number sounds very unpleasant, so there's no reason not to hear it. Zhang Xiaohua was also puzzled and said, "Yes, I think so too." At this time, they just happened to pass by a stage. Zhang Xiaohua pulled the leader and asked, "Martial uncle, can I ask why I didn't hear my number being called? What's going on?" The leader was focused on the competition in the stage and did not have the time to pay attention to him. He said absent-mindedly, "You lost, so naturally they didn't call you." Zhang Xiaohua said, "I didn't lose. The leader said that I won." The leader said casually, "Then it means that you didn't hear it. It's considered forfeiting. You're unlucky." Zhang Xiaohua wanted to cry and said, but, I really didn't hear it." Zhang Xiaohu also chimed in, "Yes, I also paid attention. I really didn't hear it." The leader slightly turned his face and said, "I don't have time. You should ask Steward Su." Steward Su, when Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he immediately came to a realization. He pulled Zhang Xiaohu and ran towards the largest stage in the field. Sure enough, from afar, he saw Steward Su watching the competition with great interest. Zhang Xiaohua walked closer and saluted Steward Su. Steward Su looked at the youth and didn't seem to recognize him. He couldn't help but ask, "You're from fledgling Eagle Hall? Why haven't I seen you before?" Zhang Xiaohua carefully explained, "That's Steward Su. I'm from Huanxi Manor." "Oh," Steward Su understood and said with a smile, "I know. You were sent by Huanxi Manor to participate in the martial arts exhibition." How was it? The martial arts exhibition wasn't bad, right? The second round of the competition was much more exciting than the first round. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "Yes, it was really exciting. The level was very high." Steward Su said proudly, "Of course. Which disciple of our Misty School's fledgling Eagle Hall isn't a dragon or phoenix among men? However, it's also not bad that you can participate in the first round of the competition. Regardless of the outcome, the most important thing is to participate. The competition is second, friendship is first. The friendship between Misty School and Huanxi Manor will last forever." All right, you really have time. There's nothing going on at Huanxi Manor, and you can actually go from the first round to the second round. Zhang Xiaohua knew that Steward Su had misunderstood and explained, "It's like this. Steward Su, I also entered the second round." Ah, Steward Su's eyeballs almost fell to the ground and said, "What did you say? You entered the second round?" Then he seemed to think of something and said, "Oh, you're really not bad. However, the second round is full of elites. If you lose, then you lose. Come, stay here with me and take a good look at how others compete. It will definitely be useful for you to learn from. Go back and practice martial arts well, and strive to win a few more rounds next year." Zhang Xiaohua still wanted to explain and said, "It's like this. Steward Su, I've already won 2 rounds in a row just now." 2 rounds? Steward Su was stunned. He was shocked and said in disbelief, "You really won 2 rounds in a row? Really?" Zhang Xiaohua said with a face of certainty. It was announced by the leader. Steward Su said in disbelief, "Since you won 2 rounds in a row, then you should compete in the third round. Why did you come to me?" Zhang Xiaohua said with an innocent face, "But I just wanted to compete in the third round. However, I didn't have the leader's number and I didn't know where to compete. That's why I came to find you." Ah, Steward Su also didn't understand and said, "How is that possible? The third round has already started and the number should have been called long ago." "All right, what's your number?" "Number 250. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate at all. 250. Steward Su also didn't hide it and shouted out, "There are only 250 disciples who entered the second round. It seems like you're the worst one. All right, come with me. I'll go and see what's going on." Steward Su called Zhang Xiaohua and walked to the side of the stage together. There were a few tables at the side of the stage. There were many pieces of paper on the tables, and a few leaders were sorting them out. Steward Su walked over and told the leaders about the matter. A leader carefully flipped through the pieces of paper and took one out. He looked at it and said a few words to Steward Su. Steward Su looked at the piece of paper and looked at Zhang Xiaohua with a strange expression. Then, he returned the piece of paper to the leader and walked back with a smile. Zhang Xiaohua quickly went up and asked, "Steward Su, did I miss it? I really didn't want to miss it. Was the leader's voice too soft? You can't blame me. Steward Su smiled and said, we didn't miss it. The leader's voice wasn't soft either. It's just that the leader didn't call your name at all. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said anxiously, that's not right. I won the second round and the leader personally announced it. Although it's a tie, I have the advantage. There's no reason to not let me participate in the third round. Steward Su smiled and said, it's not what you think. Congratulations, number 250. You've successfully entered the fourth round. Fourth round? Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled and said, but I haven't participated in the third round. Steward Su saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and explained, you got a bye in the third round and directly entered the fourth round. Bye? Zhang Xiaohua was even more puzzled and asked, what's a bye? A bye means I don't have to compete? When Steward Su heard this, he thought to himself, what kind of level is this? He doesn't know anything and his luck is quite good. Sigh, I can only teach him a lesson. In the second round, there are a total of 250 disciples. In the first round, there are an even number, so you can catch pairs to compete with each other. In the second round, there are a total of 125 pairs, which is an odd number, so you can't catch pairs to compete with each other. Therefore, there is a disciple who doesn't need to compete with each other and can directly enter the third round. This is called a bye. In the third round, there are still 63 disciples, so there must be a disciple who doesn't need to compete with each other and can directly enter the fourth round. Zhang Xiaohua exclaimed, there's such a thing? My character can't be that good. Otherwise, the fourth and fifth round would be a bye. Steward Su shook his head and said, the fourth round has 32 people. It's an even number, and naturally there's no need for a bye. The fifth round has 16 disciples and doesn't need to compete anymore. Even if it's a competition, there's no need for a bye. Chapter 184. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu discussed the serious issue of character as they walked back slowly. Since he knew that he would be able to enter the fourth round safely and easily without having to do anything himself, why wouldn't he do it? Zhang Xiaohua was in an incomparably relaxed mood. It was rare for him to hum a country tune. Zhang Xiaohu listened carefully. Sister, you sit at the bow of the boat. Brother will walk on the shore. He couldn't help but be stunned and thought to himself, since when did Guozhuang House have such a song? Why haven't I heard of it before? When the two of them returned to their original spot, the third round of the competition was nearing its end. Many disciples were hiding at the side to adjust their breathing. Zhang Xiaohu was envious and said softly, Xiaohua, look at how good they are. They are so young, and yet they have the opportunity to practice the profound inner force mantras and exquisite fist techniques. When we were so young, we were still busy helping father and mother in the fields. Zhang Xiaohua didn't think much of it and shook her head slightly. Second brother, everyone has their own path, and it's not the same. They may have a glimpse of the mysteries of martial arts, but they also lost the opportunity to enjoy the happiness of being with their family. As the ancients said, between gains and losses, who knows if it's a blessing or a curse? She then comforted Zhang Xiaohu and said, now, second brother, look, you have your hero when to teach you martial arts. As for me, I have my own fist of the North Star and ethereal steps. Yes, there's also the reckless bull force that you gave me. Compared to when we first came to Pingyang City, it's a world of difference. As a person, one must be content with what one has. Zhang Xiao nodded and said, yes, no matter what, we are bumpkins from the countryside. It's not easy for us to come this far. It's better to have a grateful heart. Zhang Xiaohua turned to look at Zhang Xiaohu and said, it seems that second brother understands. That's right. Zhang Xiaohu let out a long sigh and said, whether I want to or not is not a problem. Whether I can think through it or not is a very realistic problem. Since Master accepted me as his disciple, he naturally taught me martial arts. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stood up in front of so many people. There must be a reason for this period of neglect. I'll just be myself. Who cares about the vicissitudes of life in this world? Good job, second brother. Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and praised. Then, do you still want to close the door to your courtyard? Zhang Xiaohu's face was calm as he said, closed is open, open is closed. Why bother about it? What? Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. If it's closed, then it's closed. If it's open, then it's open. How is it as contradictory, as you say? Zhang Xiaohu also explained in a low voice. You will naturally understand in the future. While the two brothers were talking, they heard another round of numbers being called out in the field. The last round of the second round of the martial arts exhibition had finally begun. Zhang Xiaohu patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and encouraged her. Xiaohua, this is already the last round. Do your best. Whether you win or lose, you have left a solid footprint in the martial arts exhibition. Zhang Xiaohua patted the dust off her butt and grinned. Second brother, just watch me. Before the two of them reached the field, they heard a drawn-out voice from inside. Number 250, where are you? Come quickly. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu looked at each other and quickly ran inside. Now that the martial arts exhibition had entered the last round of the second round, there were only 32 disciples in the entire Kitty Hawk Hall who had advanced. The last round of the competition started at the same time, and there were only 16 matches. In other words, there were only 16 matches in the arena. Naturally, these arenas were all concentrated in the center. At this time, there were already a lot of people gathered around these 16 arenas, and they were all looking forward to the exciting matches. Zhang Xiaohua responded as she ran towards the arenas inside. Zhang Xiaohu also followed behind, but when he passed by the arena where the previous match had taken place, he was still very careful. He ran over and carried the escalator on his back. What a joke. This was a necessity for Zhang Xiaohua to enter the arena. As her second brother, if he didn't worry about it, who else could he count on? Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't learn Qigong, this guy's running speed wasn't slower than others. When Zhang Xiaohu turned around again, he had already disappeared. Fortunately, the square was filled with little radishes. With Zhang Xiaohu's height, he wasn't afraid that he couldn't find Zhang Xiaohua's figure. Of course, look over there. Isn't that Zhang Xiaohua? She stood anxiously under the arena, looking left and right, waiting for the magic weapon to enter the arena. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly pushed aside the disciples who were watching the fun. Under everyone's surprised eyes, he placed the escalator on the arena. Seeing this situation, a burst of whispers burst out. Needless to say, they were all talking about the function of the escalator. Zhang Xiaohua's face had never been as red as it was today. She secretly made up her mind that the first thing she would do when she returned to Huanqi Mountain Villa was to quickly master this Qigong. Otherwise, she couldn't afford to lose face when she went out. Under everyone's gaze, Zhang Xiaohua walked up the escalator to the arena. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent for the last round had already been waiting on the arena. This was a young man who looked very simple and honest. His body was muscular, and he was also very tall. He was even taller than Zhang Xiaohua by a head. If Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that only he, Shang Guanyun, and Yu Dei were wild cards, she would have already gone forward to ask about the origin of the opponent. When Zhang Xiaohua stood on the arena, the leader under the arena shouted, "You can start." So the disciple opposite Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and saluted and said in a low, muffled voice, "I'm Tang Shi, a disciple of young Eagle Hall. Please take care of me, senior martial brother." Zhang Xiaohua naturally also cupped his hands and saluted. Then the two of them made a fighting pose. When Tang Shi saw that Zhang Xiaohua was ready, he said, "Senior martial brother Zhang, I'm a little strong. Please be careful." After saying that, he raised his big fist and smashed it towards Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she laughed in her heart and thought, "This Tang Shi seems to be the same as Shi Niu. They both practice external martial arts. Looking at his personality, he must be a straightforward man like Shi Niu." During Zhang Xiaohua's martial art practice journey in the Misty School, all the opponents she met were all inner disciples who were good at internal martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua thought that external martial arts had withered away in the Misty School. It was difficult to find outstanding disciples. Unexpectedly, she met one in the last round. She didn't need to think to know that the opponent in front of her must be extremely outstanding. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the last round of the second round with just external martial arts. However, Zhang Xiaohua was also very proud of her strength. Seeing the opponent's fist approaching, she didn't dodge. She also leaned forward and clenched her fist to meet it. That Tang Shi's fist was actually bigger than Zhang Xiaohua's fist by size. With a pong sound, the two fists collided. A huge force came through, and Zhang Xiaohua's body was unsteady. She took 4 steps back before she could steady herself. Slightly shaking her sore arm and wrist, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the opponent in front of her again. That Tang Shi was also surprised. His previous opponents were all senior and junior brothers who he was familiar with. Almost all of them dared to exchange blows with him. Even those disciples who had profound internal martial arts were the same. The unfamiliar disciple in front of him looked very weak and actually dared to exchange blows with him. To be honest, he was afraid that he would injure his opponent and had already reduced his strength. However, Zhang Xiaohua wasn't injured and only took a few steps back. As for himself, he also took 2 steps back. The key point was that Zhang Xiaohua only shook her hand, but Tang Shi felt that his wrist and fist were already somewhat numb. Tang Shi also raised his head and looked at the unremarkable opponent in front of him again. The two people's gazes met on the stage, and sparks flew between them. Seeing the surprise, respect, and dissatisfaction in each other's eyes, the two people suddenly felt that heroes cherished heroes. Shortly after, the two people slightly narrowed their eyes and shouted at the same time. Both of them quickly stepped forward and their fists collided. The crowd below the stage heard nearly 10 consecutive pung 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 sounds on the stage. When they looked again, the two people on the stage had already pulled apart a certain distance. Both of them were using their left hand to continuously massage their right hand. Their mouths were breathing in cold air with a hee-hee sound. Presumably, both of their right hands were in pain. Seeing such a situation, the crowd below the stage couldn't help but be surprised. The sound of discussion once again rose. What kind of person was Tang Shi? How good was his martial arts? The disciples below the stage and the leader had a thunderous reputation. Not to mention his martial arts, there were very few disciples in the young Eagle Hall who could compare to him in terms of the strength of his hands. Today, a thin and ordinary youth had actually used his fist to collide with him more than 10 times and was actually not at a disadvantage. This was really beyond everyone's expectations. As for the other disciples who had seen Zhang Xiaohua compete, or had competed with Zhang Xiaohua before, they had looked down on Zhang Xiaohua before. The result of 9 fights and 9 draws in the first round was really not convincing. In the eyes of the disciples in the second round, all of the previous matches had relied on tricks to win and had a very unfair taste to them. In this exchange of fists with Tang Shi, Zhang Xiaohua's strength was ironclad. Just the strength of his arms was enough to make people have a whole new level of respect for him. However, this strength didn't represent martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua was very clear on this point. To be honest, in the exchange of fists just now, he was really half a notch inferior. Zhang Xiaohua also had a trace of understanding. No wonder the strength of his arms couldn't enter the eyes of the Misty School. Just a 10-year-old disciple from the young Eagle Hall had strength that was not below his, not to mention those disciples who were already at the same level. His strength was really nothing in the eyes of the Misty School. On the opposite side, Tang Shi saw that pure strength wasn't enough to truly subdue Zhang Xiaohua. He stood up again, his left hand formed a palm, and his right hand clenched into a fist. He attacked with a mighty King Kong hand. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He also raised his fist to meet the attack, using the Big Dipper magical fist to fight the enemy. The two of them fought for a while, but there was still no clear victor. The incense stick was already half burnt. With Zhang Xiaohua's limited fighting experience, he had used his strength and fist to force the opponent to run for his life in the previous few rounds. However, this time, the opponent was using this method to force him to the point where he couldn't gain the upper hand. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes turned, and he withdrew the Big Dipper magical fist. His footsteps suddenly became graceful and his body became light. He used the ethereal steps and followed Tang Shi's moves, evading them in an incomparably elegant manner. Zhang Xiaohua's switch from offense to defense didn't cause any reaction from the disciples below the stage who hadn't fought with him. Those disciples who had suffered under his ethereal steps had faces full of grief and indignation. They all said, "This bastard is at it again. It's that despicable and shameless footwork again." And the disciple who had fought with him in the second round was also present. He was in even more pain as he shouted loudly, "Plagiarism, plagiarism, plagiarism again." Roaming defensive tactics were indeed not uncommon in the martial arts exhibition. However, this was only limited to the first round. The second round didn't have a draw. If one was always at a disadvantage, even if it was a draw in the end, it would still be considered a failure. And the disciples who had entered the second round were all outstanding disciples. Their martial arts standards weren't too far off. Most of the disciples were willing to face their opponents head-on, and very few of them would use Qin Gong to roam. Last time, Zhang Xiaohua's opponent had used the roaming tactic so easily that he was considered a failure. Now that Zhang Xiaohua had used it, many people couldn't understand. However, Zhang Xiaohua's roaming technique was different from others. The Misty School's disciples who used roaming techniques to avoid their opponent's attacks all used Qin Gong. Qin Gong consumed internal energy, but it was less than the opponent's blindly attacking. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know any internal energy. What he used was the ethereal steps. It was just a type of Qin Gong technique and pure footwork. It didn't consume any internal energy at all. The reason why Zhang Xiaohua picked up the ethereal steps again wasn't because his Big Dipper fist was inferior to the mighty King Kong palm. It was because he thought that in the 4 rounds of the second round, he had just taken a bye. He heard from Steward Su that he also had a bye in the second round. Tang Shi's character wasn't good enough to take a bye in the second round. Therefore, Tang Shi should have already gone through 3 rounds of fierce battles. Tang Shi was using an external cultivation technique and wasn't able to regulate his breathing and recover his physical strength. Presumably, he wouldn't be able to recover through punching like himself. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua was certain that Tang Shi's physical strength had been greatly depleted. If he were to go head-to-head with him due to his strength and fist techniques, he might be at a disadvantage. Since that was the case, he might as well show weakness now and use guerrilla tactics to deplete his physical strength once again. He would then save up enough energy to give him a head-on blow at the second incense stick's time. He believed that it would have a miraculous effect. Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts weren't wrong. Tang Shi attacked for a while and didn't manage to touch a single hair on Zhang Xiaohua's body. He couldn't help but feel dejected. His footsteps became heavy and the wind from his punches also weakened. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately gave up on the ethereal steps and raised his fist to attack. Tang Shi was shocked and hurriedly withdrew his mind and strengthened his attacks. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that Tang Shi's moves were fierce, he immediately executed the ethereal steps. After a few rounds, Tang Shi was exhausted. This exhaustion wasn't just physical strength, it was also mental strength. As for Tang Shi, after the previous 3 matches, he had exhausted all his strength. He didn't have a method to recover his strength easily like Zhang Xiaohua. In this last match, he was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Especially in the first few exchanges of punches, his strength had been greatly depleted. In fact, his calculations were also very good. He wanted to concentrate his strength and knock his opponent off the stage in the early stages. But as it happened, Zhang Xiaohua actually used guerrilla tactics when he gathered his strength and prepared to fight head-on. When the enemy was tired, she would disturb him. When the enemy advanced, she would retreat. This made Tang Shi's heart burn with anger. He gradually felt that the strength in his body was slowly draining away. He was really tired and wanted to end the battle with a punch. However, he was facing Zhang Xiaohua, who was as slippery as a loach. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't land a punch on her body. Very quickly, the incense stick burned out. The other incense stick was also burning halfway. Zhang Xiaohua and Tang Shi glanced at the incense stick at the same time. The two of them had two different thoughts at the same time. Tang Shi was delighted. Ever since he entered the stage, he had always been in an advantageous position. Even if Zhang Xiaohua increased her attacks in the last half an incense stick's time, as long as he could withstand it and achieve a draw, this match would be considered his victory. Needless to say, if that was really the case, this match would be a replica of Zhang Xiaohua's previous victory. Zhang Xiaohua saw that there was still half an incense stick's time left. She was also delighted. Tang Shi's strength was almost depleted while she still had a large portion of her strength. With this difference, she already had the advantage. If she didn't attack now, when would she? As a result, Zhang Xiaohua stopped using the ethereal steps and waved her fist. Although Tang Shi was tall and strong, he wasn't a brainless person. He immediately dodged. However, his light body technique wasn't strong, and he didn't have the ethereal steps technique. With just a few steps on the stage, where could he dodge to? In just a few moves, he was immediately forced to a corner of the stage by Zhang Xiaohua. If he didn't exchange blows, he would be forced out of the stage. As a result, Tang Shi could only grit his teeth and risk his life to compete with Zhang Xiaohua. Tang Shi was indeed a genius. At the final juncture, the strength of his fist and the momentum of his moves didn't lose out to Zhang Xiaohua at all. In just a few moves, he forced Zhang Xiaohua to retreat a few steps. However, with the feeling of exchanging blows with Tang Shi earlier, Zhang Xiaohua already knew that Tang Shi was already at the stage of a thief fleeing the building. As long as she put in a little more effort, she would be able to defeat him. Zhang Xiaohua's spirit rose. Her fists were like raindrops hitting banana leaves. Tang Shi could only parry and had no strength to fight back. But even in this storm-like attack, Tang Shi was still tenacious. No matter how much strength Zhang Xiaohua exerted or how she attacked, he only focused on parrying and quietly waited for the final moment to arrive. Tang Shi wasn't in a hurry, but Zhang Xiaohua was naturally anxious. He didn't want to repeat the same mistake and be eliminated with a draw. So he took a deep breath and attacked even harder. His fists hit the places where Tang Shi had to parry. Step by step, he forced him to the edge of the stage. Tang Shi's back was facing the stage. Although he couldn't see the scene behind him, he had retreated a lot and had a rough idea. Moreover, there were many Tang Shi's fellow apprentices below the stage. From time to time, someone would remind him, "You can't push anymore. You will be forced out in 4 or 5 steps." Tang Shi might dodge, but Zhang Xiaohua was determined this time. He didn't give him any chance to dodge, and he didn't have any more strength in his body. It was already very strenuous to parry Zhang Xiaohua's fists, let alone force him to retreat. Seeing that he was at the edge of the stage, Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. He gathered all the strength in his body and shouted, "You can go down now." As he spoke, he used all the strength in his body to punch Tang Shi's chest. "Please collect, thank you." Chapter 185. Just as Zhang Xiaohua's fist was about to hit Tang Shi's body, no matter if Tang Shi raised his hand to meet it or if Zhang Xiaohua hit his body, Tang Shi would inevitably be knocked out of the ring by Zhang Xiaohua. But looking at Zhang Xiaohua's punch that was sure to succeed in one battle, Tang Shi actually calmed down and raised his right fist to meet it. But when the two fists collided, he suddenly changed his fist into a palm. Using his right palm to meet Zhang Xiaohua's fist, he leaned to one side and used all the strength in his body to grab Zhang Xiaohua's fist. Taking advantage of the momentum, Zhang Xiaohua's body involuntarily rushed past Tang Shi's side and straight out of the ring. Wasn't this the same technique that Nye Little Fool had used on Zhang Xiaohua back then? This technique of 4 ounces deflects 1,000 caddies was quite effective against opponents with greater strength than him. However, it was also a relatively advanced technique. Because Tang Shi's strength was great, when he fought with internal experts, he often encountered situations where he was called by others. Thus, as he fought, he got used to it. He also had some experience with this technique, but after all, his internal strength wasn't very deep, and his use of internal strength was far less flexible than others. Thus, although he knew how to use it, he had never actually used it, and he also didn't expect to have the opportunity to practice it. After all, in the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall, no one had more strength than him, so it wasn't worth him calling. But today, he met Zhang Xiaohua, who actually had the same strength as him. In the fourth round of the competition, his strength was almost exhausted, but Zhang Xiaohua still had strength. In the end, she actually forced him into a corner. It was Zhang Xiaohua's last punch that instantly made him remember this technique that he had never practiced before. Thus, Tang Shi also treated a dead horse as a living horse. He turned around and used the method that others often used against him on Zhang Xiaohua. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was also inexperienced and fell for the trick. When his body was pulled to Tang Shi's side, he shouted in his heart, I've been tricked. But this time, he wanted to stabilize his body, but it was already impossible. The two of them used their strength together, just like how Zhang Xiaohua and Tang Shi pushed Zhang Xiaohua together, pushing him out of the arena. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua pass by his side, Tang Shi hurriedly let go of his hand and retracted his arm. His eyes could not help but follow his arm as it left Zhang Xiaohua's figure. In his heart, since Zhang Xiaohua had gone up the escalator, her qigong was not as good as his. Since her figure had already left the arena, how could she come back? Even if Zhang Xiaohua's qigong was top-notch, once he left the arena, there would be no place for him to borrow strength. How could he return from outside the arena? But just as he turned his head, before he could turn around, he heard a cry of surprise from behind. Be careful. Tang Shi hurriedly turned his head back, but did not see any abnormality. In the empty area of the arena, there was no trace of Zhang Xiaohua. His heart was set, and just as he was about to cup his fist to the people below the arena, he felt a huge force coming from his shoulder. He could no longer control his body and rushed out from the place where Zhang Xiaohua had rushed out of the arena. Tang Shi fell out of the arena and only slightly adjusted his unbalanced body in the air before he immediately stood on the ground below the arena. When he turned back to look at the arena again, Zhang Xiaohua, who should have been pushed off the arena by him, was standing steadily on the arena and happily cupping his fist to the people below the arena to thank him. Tang Shi's face was filled with confusion. In fact, just as Tang Shi had pushed Zhang Xiaohua off the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's figure had already left the edge of the arena. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was regretting that she had been tricked. Her mind was spinning nonstop, trying to salvage the situation. But she did not know qigong at all, so how could she turn back in the air? But at this critical juncture, Zhang Xiaohua immediately thought of the floating technique of the third level of the ethereal steps. That day when she was thrown out of the arena by Leader Chong, there was already a tendency for her to float. If she did not use it now, when would she? Therefore, thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately followed the instructions of the cultivation technique and circulated the qi in her meridians. At this time, the cultivation technique followed the person. The moment Zhang Xiaohua's figure left the arena, her figure actually floated up. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua immediately used her qi to propel her body and used the ethereal steps. Her entire body was like a spinning top, taking advantage of the opportunity to eliminate the force of her body rushing out. She also took the opportunity to change the direction of her body and floated to the inside of the arena, landing on the other side of Tang Shi. At this time, in the eyes of the people below the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's figure did not leave the arena. It was just that her feet used some unknown method to borrow the force of the rotation on the arena to change the direction of the force, causing the crowd to immediately cry out in alarm. By the time Tang Shi turned around, Zhang Xiaohua had already rotated to the air behind Tang Shi. Borrowing the force of the rotation, Zhang Xiaohua kicked towards Tang Shi's shoulder. At this moment, Tang Shi was unguarded and was kicked, resulting in the scene of Tang Shi falling off the arena. When Tang Shi landed, he raised his head and looked at Zhang Xiaohua on the arena in confusion. The half-incense stick below the arena had just finished burning. The leader looked at the fallen Tang Shi and Zhang Xiaohua in the arena, who was not pleasing to the eye. He angrily announced, "Number 250, victory!" The disciples below the arena also let out a buzz. It was unknown whether they were praising or insulting, but they all dispersed. Tang Shi's face was also filled with regret. He hung his head and prepared to follow the crowd to another place. Tang Shi, stop right there. Suddenly, two people called out in unison. When Tang Shi turned around, it was Zhang Xiaohua and the leader below the arena who called out to him at the same time. Puzzled, Tang Shi asked, "Leader, is there anything else?" The leader said, "Tang Shi, don't be in such a hurry to leave. Although you lost this round, it doesn't mean that you can't pass the second round." Tang Shi's face was filled with confusion as he said, "Since I've already lost, what qualifications do I have to pass the second round?" At this time, Zhang Xiaohua in the arena also came down the escalator. She smiled at Tang Shi and said, "Brother Tang, this is the fortune of fools. Even if you lost, you can still pass." Tang Shi was not happy and said, "You're the fool. Although I practice external techniques, my brain is not outside. Don't try to trick me." Zhang Xiaohua giggled and said, "If I lied to you, would the leader also lie to you?" Looking at Tang Shi's childish face, the leader explained, "It's like this. Tang Shi, this number 250 is not a disciple of our Kitty Hawk Hall. He only participated in the written test and did not occupy the quota of our Kitty Hawk Hall. In other words, although you lost, your quota of number 250 cannot be snatched from you. On the other hand, you won. Number 250 cannot pass the second round." Tang Shi suddenly understood and said, "No wonder I felt that you looked unfamiliar. I have never seen you in the Kitty Hawk Hall, so you're not my senior brother. That's right, this means that in this last round, no matter if I win or lose, I still have to pass." Zhang Xiaohua and the leader nodded and said in unison, "That's right." Tang Shi's face was calm as he said, "Yes, it seems that my character is really not bad." Zhang Xiaohua and the leader both fell to the ground with a bang. Including Zhang Xiaohua, there were a total of 17 people who passed the second round. The disciples of the Kitty Hawk Hall who passed were all grinning from ear to ear. The rewards for the second round were very generous and related to their future in martial arts. How could they not be excited? Of course, if they could challenge the second rank commoner Cloak Hall tomorrow, there would be even more unimaginable rewards. Therefore, after Steward Su explained to everyone that the third round of challenges would be held in the square in front of the conference hall, everyone dispersed in an uproar. Nonsense, they had already competed in 4 rounds today and were so tired that they were hovering between life and death. Which one of them did not want to hurry back to their residence to rest and recuperate so that they could have better results tomorrow? Only Zhang Xiaohua asked Zhang Xiaohu with a puzzled expression, "Second brother, is it because the dining hall of the Kitty Hawk Hall is too small that these children are fighting to eat there?" Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohu to answer, she nodded her head and said, "It must be so. On one hand, it can increase income and reduce expenditure, and on the other hand, it can train these children's qigong. AI, it really is a good idea." Zhang Xiaohu listened to Zhang Xiaohua muttering to herself and could not help but smile. "Xiaohua, do you want to eat red braised meat again?" Red braised meat? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she could not help but secretly swallow her saliva and said, "Yes, I haven't eaten it in a while." Second brother, it's strange if you didn't mention red braised meat. I wouldn't have thought of it. Furthermore, it has been a long time since I liked to eat meat as much as I did before. However, now that you mention it, I really miss that tempting taste. Zhang Xiaohu smiled slightly and said, "It's a pity that this is not the Guizhuang house and I can't make red braised meat for you at any time. If we were at home, perhaps Mother would make it for you." Speaking of their parents in the Guizhuang house, the two of them were a little sad. However, Zhang Xiaohu forced a smile and said, "After this martial arts exhibition, let's find a chance to go back and take a look. We've been out for more than a year. It's time to go out and take a look." Zhang Xiaohua also nodded and said, "All right, it's decided then. All right, I wonder how Captain he is doing with his ethereal steps. He didn't come to watch me compete today." Zhang Xiaohu patted his shoulder and said, "Then why don't we go and take a look?" You also have the pharmacy hall's token now. If we don't use it now, when will we? Thinking of the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and touched the token in her bosom and said, I also have the same intention. If we don't use the token, it will expire and become invalid. If their hall master takes it back, we won't be able to go even if we want to. After the two brothers finished their discussion, they walked all the way to the pharmacy hall. If the martial arts exhibition was compared to a festival, this lively festival had already come to an end. The Misty School disciples who had enjoyed the festival's hustle and bustle were still excited. They could be seen in groups of 2s and 3s, or in groups gathering together. Some were whispering, some had excited expressions, and some were competing in a circle. The Misty School didn't forbid the disciples from competing, but this kind of competition had to be carried out in the practice room. Only during the martial arts exhibition was the time when the disciples were allowed to exchange pointers in the open space to deepen their understanding of the competition. Zhang Xiaohua and her brother walked all the way. Whenever they came across a place where people were exchanging pointers, they would stop with interest and stand outside to watch the excitement. Sometimes, when they saw something exciting, they couldn't help but clap and cheer, attracting the attention of others. However, how could Zhang Xiaohua be interested in looking at other people's faces? Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was still young, so it was more than enough for her to pretend to be a disciple of Fledgling Hall. Presumably, Zhang Xiaohua thought in her heart, you may not remember my face anyway, so I'll leave this disdain and contempt to Fledgling Hall. Along the way, the small arenas that were commonly seen a few days ago were also removed. The joys and sorrows left to the disciples on the arenas had become memories. A trace of understanding rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. The world was like floating clouds. No matter how noisy it was, no matter how prosperous it was, there would always be a moment when it passed. What was left? How much was left? Even when they approached the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua was still stuck in that moment of enlightenment. Zhang Xiaohu felt Zhang Xiaohu's abnormality and asked with some worry, Xiaohua, why aren't you saying anything? Are you tired? Why don't we go back to my place to rest? Zhang Xiaohu's ordinary and faint words of concern instantly put an end to Zhang Xiaohua's enlightenment. A warm current rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. At the same time, Zhang Xiaohua also felt a kacha sound coming from somewhere in her mind, as if she had broken free from some kind of restraint. Zhang Xiaohua felt a great sense of freedom. Yes, perhaps the world was like clouds and unpredictable, but the worry, concern of those close to you, no matter what kind of environment, whether you cared about it or not, were real. It gave you a safe reliance and accompanied you on the road of life. On this ordinary afternoon, on this ordinary journey, why would Zhang Xiaohu think so much? After he finished asking, Zhang Xiaohua raised her head and said with a faint smile, Second brother, don't worry. I'm just thinking about some things. I'm not tired. Let's go. Let's hurry into the pharmacy hall. I can't help but want to see Captain He's progress. Zhang Xiaohua was still Zhang Xiaohua, and her smile was still so cute. However, in Zhang Xiaohu's eyes, this younger brother of his was a little different. What exactly was it? He couldn't tell. It seemed like he had grown up and matured a little, or maybe his aura had changed a little. Gradually, he started to have the feeling of looking up to a tall mountain. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't tell. This was because Zhang Xiaohua was transforming bit by bit without anyone noticing. There was still a guard at the entrance of the pharmacy hall, but it wasn't the one they saw last time. Zhang Xiaohu took out his waist token and Zhang Xiaohua showed it. The guard carefully checked the token for a long time before letting them in. After the two entered, they didn't know where to find He Tian Shu. Should they go to his room or directly to the technique practicing room? Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment before saying to Zhang Xiao, this ethereal steps was personally bestowed by sect leader O. He clearly said that it can't be taught to anyone privately. I believe Captain He can't openly practice it in the technique practicing room. I reckon he's still practicing alone in his residence. Zhang Xiaohu felt that it made sense. Following his memory, he found He Tianshu's residence. Zhang Xiaohua still understood He Tianshu. With He Tianshu's cautiousness, Why would he practice in a crowded place? He would feel uncomfortable hiding in his own residence. Fortunately, he was practicing the ethereal steps. It didn't require much space. If he really wanted to practice the third level of Qigong, the space in this small house wasn't enough for him. When Tianshu opened the door and saw Zhang Xiaohua, both of them were very surprised. Tianshu asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, why are you still in Ethereal Mountain Manor? The martial arts exhibition is already over. Why don't you hurry back to Huanxi Mountain Manor? The herb fields there still need someone to look after them." When Zhang Xiaohua saw Tianshu's disheveled appearance and sunken eyes, she was also very surprised. It wasn't that Tianshu hadn't comprehended the ethereal steps before, but it wasn't to such an extent of obsession. Now, it seemed that the dispirited look on his face wasn't something that could be caused in a day or two. Zhang Xiaohua didn't directly answer Tianshu's question. Instead, she asked with concern, "Captain He, how did you become like this? How did you become so haggard after not seeing you for 2 days?" Zhang Xiaohu was also shocked. He said, "Captain He, if you aren't feeling well, you still have to go to the medical hall. Don't delay." Tianshu rubbed the space between his eyebrows and squeezed out a smile. "It's nothing. I was just comprehending that footwork. I didn't sleep all night, so I became like this. After I finish comprehending it, I'll be fine after a good rest." However, Zhang Xiao didn't let it go and said, "Captain He, didn't you also comprehend it a few times before? I didn't see you like this. Could it be that it didn't go well this time?" Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, "Come, let's talk inside." After the three of them entered the house, Tianshu said, "This time's comprehension is different from the previous time. Yesterday, I saw you use the ethereal steps. It was different from what I comprehended. It was even different from what was recorded in the secret manual. I thought that since you were able to use it, it must be correct." Chapter 186. Zhang Xiaohua immediately asked, "Then do you think there would be any mistakes in this secret manual?" Tianshu hesitated for a moment before replying, "It shouldn't be. Even if there are some mistakes, it wouldn't be as full of mistakes as when you executed it." Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and said, "That's right. Captain He, if there were any mistakes in the ethereal steps technique, then how did sect leader O and the rest succeed in cultivating it? If it's just a few pieces of paper that recorded it wrongly, the possibility isn't very high. After all, you've also practiced quite a bit." Tianshu was still puzzled and asked, "But why did you execute it differently from this footwork?" Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "Captain He, what do you think of my martial arts foundation?" Tianshu laughed and said, "What foundation do you have? You have nothing." Zhang Xiaohua immediately asked, "Then what about your martial arts foundation compared to mine?" Tianshu gave Zhang Xiaohua a sideways glance and said, "What are you trying to say? How can your martial arts foundation be compared to mine? It's like the difference between heaven and earth." Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "Don't worry. Since you know that your foundation is better than mine, then you must also know that when I read this secret manual, I was simply blindly reading it. It was only after you taught me the first level that I was able to understand this secret manual. The reason I was able to use it was purely because I figured it out myself. I definitely couldn't completely follow what was recorded in the secret manual. I used it to the extent that I could, and it wasn't a copy of the secret manual at all. You're different from me. The ethereal steps recorded in this secret manual is tailor-made for a Misty School elite like you. If you were to comprehend it according to my Wild Fox Inn, it would definitely go against what was recorded in the secret manual. How could you succeed in comprehending it?" When Tianshu heard this, his eyes unconsciously lit up as he nodded slightly. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua continued, "Captain He, let's talk about it in depth. Did you see that I was able to completely execute the second level of the ethereal steps in the arena, and you still have a lot to comprehend? Did you feel uncomfortable in your heart?" When Tianshu heard this, he blushed and shook his head in denial. No, there's no such thing." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he couldn't help but think of himself and shake his head. Zhang Xiaohua didn't refute him. She only said, "Actually, Captain He, although the ancients have a good saying, there's 100 years of learning, and the one who reaches the top is the teacher. But think about how embarrassing it was when I was learning the fist art. You don't have to be so jealous of me, just because I have a little bit of achievement in ethereal steps." When He Tianshu heard this, he slapped Zhang Xiaohua's head and said with a smile, "Little fella, I'm not jealous of you. I just feel that sect leader O asked me to teach you a movement technique, but I haven't learned it yet. I feel that I've let him down." Zhang Xiaohu also spoke up from the side. He said solemnly, "Martial Uncle He, I know that if one blindly studies the cultivation of the inner force cultivation technique and goes into a dead end, it's very easy to go berserk. But I wonder if the cultivation of the movement technique is the same?" This sentence was like a heavy hammer that smashed into He Tianshu's heart. His expression immediately turned serious as he said, "Zhang Xiaohu, you're right. It's not just the inner force cultivation technique. It's the same for the cultivation of other martial arts. The most taboo in martial arts is to walk into a dead end. Not only is it easy to create a bottleneck, it's very easy to go berserk and be unable to extricate oneself. Today, I've really fallen into a vicious circle that I can't walk out of. I really have to thank you for coming to find me. If this continues for a few more days, it might have a very serious impact on me." Zhang Xiaohu and Zhang Xiaohua were stunned. They asked at the same time, "It's that serious?" He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, "The path of martial arts is incomparably difficult. It's far from what you can imagine. In the future, as you improve, you'll know." Since he put down the burden in his heart, He Tianshu put the secret book away and temporarily stopped thinking about it. He then asked, "Oh right, Zhang Xiaohua, you still haven't told me. We've been in the Misty Mountain Villa for a long time. You should hurry back and check on Medicine Field. Don't make any trouble." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head disapprovingly and said, "What trouble can there be? Isn't it just weeding? In this period of time, the grass in the field doesn't seem to be so long. There's no need to clear it like this." He Tianshu was a bit puzzled and said, "The grass in the medicine field has always been dense and hard to clear. It's not like you said, it actually doesn't grow. That's good. We could just watch from the side as we plant the herbs." Zhang Xiaohua saw that He Tianshu didn't believe her and said, "If Captain He doesn't believe me, you can go take a look now." He Tianshu waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm at ease with you handling things. It wasn't easy to hide in the medicine hall. Why wouldn't I stay for a few more days?" Soon after, he seemed to realize something and asked, "I'm asking you, kid, why don't you hurry back and check on the medicine field?" Zhang Xiaohua spread her hands and said with a helpless expression, "It's not that I don't want to go back. Someone else won't let me go." "Who?" He Tianshu was angry and said, "Who has the guts to stop you? Hurry up and tell me. I'll make the decision for you." Zhang Xiaohua smiled slyly and said, "I'm afraid you can't afford to offend this person." "Can't afford to offend?" He Tianshu rolled his eyes and probed. "Could it be that boss O asked you to stay? Or maybe Manor Lord O agreed?" "Uft." Zhang Xiaohua laughed out loud and said self-deprecatingly, "Captain He, who do you think I am? Why would I wander around in front of two big shots when I have nothing to do?" He Tianshu was a bit anxious and said, "Then you should tell me clearly. Who is it that won't let you go back?" Zhang Xiaohua couldn't stand it anymore and rebuked, "Xiaohua, stop teasing me. Hurry up and tell Martial Uncle He everything clearly." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she laughed and said, "Let me tell you a piece of good news. I fought 9 battles and drew 9 draws yesterday and entered the second round of the martial arts exhibition. Captain He, you didn't see it yesterday. It's a pity that you didn't get to feast your eyes." When He Tianshu heard this news, he was a bit surprised and said, 9 battles and 9 draws only gave you 9 points. With a mere 9 points, you can enter the second round?" Zhang Xiaohua patted her chest and said, "It's the real deal." He Tianshu smiled and said, "That can only mean that you're lucky. Even if you pass, you'll be last. Moreover, with your cowardly fighting style, there's really nothing to see. What's there for me to feast my eyes on? Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly. You really have sharp eyes. My number plate is indeed the last. Hearing this, He Tianshu suddenly came to a realization. He smiled and said, Today is the second round of the competition. Zhang Xiaohua, did you get beaten up badly by others today? Then, without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to reply, he said, The disciples who entered the second round all have the strength of a cotton cloak stage 1. Moreover, the duration of the competition is prolonged. I'm afraid that your fist techniques might not be enough. Most of them are disciples with good inner strength. I'm sure they have their own methods to restrain your strength. Moreover, if you continue to use the ethereal steps, I'm sure the leader will still judge you to lose in the end. No matter how you look at it, you can't escape the word failure. Zhang Xiaohua bared her teeth and said unhappily, Captain don't tell me you don't think highly of your most beloved disciple. Do you really think that the martial arts you taught me will be ruined by me, just like that? He Tianshu also chuckled and said, Well, I'm just stating facts. Moreover, the disciples of the Eagle Hall have been practicing martial arts for so many years. You've only been learning for so long. It's normal that you're not their match. However, he immediately saw Zhang Xiaohua's smiling expression. He couldn't help but open his mouth in surprise. He pointed at Zhang Xiaohua and asked, It can't be. Don't tell me you can actually win a round? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said narcissistically, It's not just a round. I'm now one of the contestants challenging the third round. When He Tianshu heard this, he hurriedly ran outside. He opened the door and stuck his head out to take a look before turning back. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu were puzzled and asked, Captain what's wrong? Are you afraid that someone will eavesdrop outside? However, He Tianshu said, That's not it. I just want to see where the sun will set today. Zhang Xiaohua said in surprise, That goes without saying. It will definitely set in the west. He Tianshu laughed loudly and said, After hearing your news, I thought that the sun would rise from the west today. Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips and said, Is it necessary? Is my martial arts that bad? He Tianshu laughed and said, It's not necessary, it's necessary. I thought that you would be burning incense to be able to win a round, but I didn't expect that you would be able to win all the rounds. Amazing, amazing. Is this the legendary hero from the youth? Quick, tell me how you passed the test. Zhang Xiaohua was annoyed that he laughed at her and refused to say anything. He Tianshu could only look at Zhang Xiaohu for help. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't stand his sad eyes. After a while, he couldn't take it anymore and told him everything that happened in the arena today. When he heard that Zhang Xiaohua used different methods to pass and even had a free pass, He Tianshu yelled that the heavens were unfair. Why didn't he encounter such a good thing in the past? When Zhang Xiaohua asked He Tianshu how he passed the second round in the past, he stammered and refused to say clearly. In the end, he was forced to say it out helplessly. However, he was kicked off the arena in the first round. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh loudly. Although He Tianshu was ridiculing Zhang Xiaohua for being able to pass like this, but after all, she was a disciple that he taught himself. He Tianshu was also happy, thinking that he still had to challenge the second-level commoner disciple tomorrow. He Tianshu carefully explained some details and then urged Zhang Xiaohua to rest early so that she could recover her energy and strength to face tomorrow's healthy battle. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't have any expectations for tomorrow's challenge, it was still a competition after all. She could not be serious, so she didn't dare to be negligent. She went to the medicine hall's guest room early and closed the door to rest. It was still early at this time. Normally, Zhang Xiaohua would be reading books about medicinal herbs. Although this guest room was the medicine hall's, there weren't any books about medicinal herbs. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't used to it and walked left and right. Suddenly, she thought of the Carefree Heart Sutra in her arms. Ever since this book was taken out from the Misty School's library, she had only familiarized herself with the first level of the cultivation technique. Our Misty School has many disciples, so how big can the square be? Naturally, Only a portion of the disciples who are qualified can watch the competition. Nie Xiao Er and the others can't go. Zhang Xiaohua was very happy when she heard that. If they didn't go, then there would be fewer people to watch her fail miserably. Zhang Xiao also thought about it and asked casually, Marshal Uncle other than the medicinal hall, which other disciples are like you and don't need to pass the third round? He Tianshu said without hesitation, at least there's Ming Tsue Hall. They are female disciples, so their strength and inner strength are different from us male disciples. If they compete on the same stage, they are weaker. Therefore, the competition in this martial arts exhibition is different from ours. Actually, this martial arts exhibition is mainly prepared for common, clothed, low-level disciples. They have the most people, and it's easier for them to advance. They usually advance one level per year, so they are happy to participate. As for the high-level disciples, sometimes they may not even advance one level in 2 or 3 years. Zhang Xiaohua nodded. Zhang Xiaohua asked again, then the people who are going to pass the third round today are all common, clothed, low-level disciples, right? Tianshu thought for a moment and said, that might not be the case. It's different every year. Maybe there are many high-level disciples who are challenging above their level this year. Zhang Xiaohua's face was full of anticipation and said, I really want to see the high-level disciples compete. I wonder what their competition is like. Tianshu smiled and said, won't we know when we see it? When Zhang Xiaohua and the other two arrived at the square in front of the assembly hall, the sun was already high up in the sky. The square in front of the assembly hall wasn't very big, so there weren't many arenas built. There were only 6 arenas. Near the entrance of the assembly hall was a slightly bigger arena. The other 5 arenas were like stars surrounding the moon, surrounded in a semicircle. These 6 arenas were more than twice as big as the one in Kitty Eagle Hall, and were about half the height of a person. There were many people in the square, but it wasn't as many as Zhang Xiaohua imagined. Moreover, there weren't any guards standing guard to check the disciples' identity or qualification. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but turn around and ask Tianshu, Captain this square isn't big. If all the unqualified disciples come a watch, won't it be too big? Won't anyone care? Tianshu snorted at Zhang Xiaohua's question and said, do you think that the disciples of our Misty School are like you, unorganized and undisciplined? Our sect's rules are very strict. The rule of the martial arts exhibition is that disciples who are qualified to watch can come to the square to watch. Those who aren't qualified to watch, of course, won't come. Zhang Xiaohua nodded embarrassedly. She really felt that she had asked a stupid question. Zhang Xiaohu heard this and smiled, asking, Marshal Uncle I also have a question, but I don't know if I should say it. Tianshu turned his head and said, if you have something to say, then say it. You're a direct disciple, so you naturally have the qualifications to watch. You probably don't know this, so I'll tell you now. Zhang Xiaohu shook his head and said, I'm not asking about this, but a very practical question. Tianshu said curiously, then tell me, what is the practical question? Chapter 187. Zhang Xiaohu pointed at the stage that was as tall as 2 people and said with a smile, such a tall stage, I don't know how Xiaohua can get up there. Zhang Xiaohua slapped the back of her head and almost cried out, oh, I forgot that the escalator is over at Kitty Hawk Hall. It must have been put away a long time ago and won't be easy to find. What should I do? Tianshu helplessly looked at Zhang Xiaohua and complained, Zhang Xiaohua, can't you hurry up and learn that reckless bull force? Hurry up and learn Qigong. Do you know that you're making me lose face by doing this every day? After he finished speaking, he said, you guys wait a moment, and ran out. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Tianshu's back and laughed, saying to herself, I don't even think it's embarrassing and you're afraid of losing face. Not long after, Tianshu was seen carrying an escalator and came back under the strange gazes of the disciples. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua and her brother, Tianshu angrily threw the escalator to Zhang Xiaohu and said, I knew that you guys wouldn't bring me here so early in the morning for anything good. Zhang Xiaohu caught the escalator and was about to say something when he heard the sound of a bell. The entire square immediately quieted down. Zhang Xiaohua looked around in surprise, not knowing what had happened. He Tianshu quickly patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said in a low voice, "The third stage is about to begin. Pay attention and don't talk. Just watch carefully." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately raised her head and looked at the largest stage in front of her, but there was still no one there. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled when she saw a group of people walk out from the meeting hall behind the stage. At the front was the Misty School's leader, Peng. Zhang Xiaohua recognized some of the people behind him, and some she hadn't seen before. They were all high-ranking members of the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohua thought that they would go to the stage, but they went up the stairs and walked to a stage made of reed mats. There were many tables and chairs under the reed mats. Zhang Xiaohua held her forehead and laughed secretly. The stage was where the competition was held. What was the leader doing there? When Peng and the others sat down under the reed mats, they saw a young disciple jump onto the stage. It was the Misty School's first disciple, Zhang Chengyue. When Zhang Chengyue arrived on the stage, he looked around and looked at the people in the square and said loudly, "The third stage of the martial arts exhibition begins now." Zhang Chengyue's voice wasn't loud, but it echoed throughout the square. It was as if he was speaking beside everyone's ears. Zhang Xiaohua was envious. She looked at He Tianshu from the corner of her eyes and thought, as expected of the first disciple, his inner strength isn't just a little bit higher than He Tianshu's. Actually, Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts had already entered the alley and could tell the level of Zhang Chengyue and He Tianshu's martial arts based on her intuition. However, if the two of them didn't really fight, how could she tell who was stronger and who wasn't? What she relied on was the jealous look in He Tianshu's eyes. Today was the third stage of the martial arts exhibition. It was also the essence of the martial arts exhibition. It was the most lively moment. All the disciples who had won in the previous stages had to show their skills today. Moreover, only today would sect leader O personally come to the stage. Even if sect leader O's vision was high, the people in the reed mats were all elders of the sect. If her performance was recognized by those people, wouldn't her future in the Misty School be bright? Not to mention the disciples below the stage who were eager to fight. Zhang Chengyue on the stage took out a piece of paper and said with a smile, "First of all, congratulations to the 17 disciples who won in the first stage of the Fledgling Hall's Common Cloth Clothed Rank 1 disciples for successfully passing the appraisal of Common Cloth Clothed Rank 1. Today, they will be challenging Common Cloth Clothed Rank 2 disciples. I hope they will have a result that will excite us. In advance, we have already selected 17 disciples from Common Cloth Clothed Rank 2 disciples. They will be in Stage 1 to Stage 5. Go to the various stages according to the order in which I read out the number plates and prepare for today's competition." After he finished speaking, Zhang Chengyue raised the paper in his hand and read, "Number 1, number 5, number 12, and number 31 will be in Stage 1. Number 2, number 6, number 28, and number 33 will be in Stage 2. Number 3, number 8, and number 49 will be in Stage 3. Number 57 and number 59. When he read to this point, he paused and frowned slightly. He seemed to be hesitating, but he still continued to read, and number 250 will be in Stage 5. As soon as Zhang Chengyue's voice fell, there was a hubbub in the square. The disciples in the square were all Common Cloth Clothed Rank 1 disciples. They had participated in the third stage of the martial arts exhibition more than once or twice. Many of the older disciples had participated in more than 10 sessions. They naturally knew that the contestants in the third stage were all Common Cloth Clothed Rank 1 elites. Moreover, the number plates were given out according to the results of the first stage. There had never been more than 100 disciples who entered the third stage. Even those who were less than 50 were extremely rare. But now, when they heard Zhang Chengyue read out number 250, Those who had a slight idea of the number of young Eagle Hall disciples this year would know that number 250 was probably the last person to pass the first stage. For such a disciple to be able to enter the third stage, this was probably an almost impossible matter. Therefore, everyone inevitably began to discuss. When Zhang Chengyue saw the reaction of the disciples, his frown deepened. He looked at the paper in his hand again and confirmed that he had not read it wrong. Only then did he lightly snort. That snort resounded throughout the square like thunder in everyone's ears. The entire square immediately quieted down. Zhang Chengyue continued. The rules of the challenge competition are the same as before. After the time it takes for 3 incense sticks to burn, if it's a draw, the challenger wins. The list of common cloth-clothed rank 1 will end here. The list of the other ranks will be announced after the common cloth-clothed rank 1 competition is over. Next, contestants, please come to the stage. After he finished speaking, Zhang Chengyue floated down the stage and walked towards the reed mat shelter. Following that, 5 older disciples also gracefully leaped onto the stage. They were presumably the common cloth-clothed rank 2 disciples waiting to challenge them. Originally, Stage 1 was reserved for the most outstanding disciple of the second stage. The competition on this stage was always the most exciting. Usually, it was packed with people. But now, many disciples were rushing towards Stage 5, wanting to see the true face of contestant number 250. Today, Stage 1 was empty. Seeing all the disciples walking toward Stage 5, how could Zhang Xiaohua not know their intentions? This fellow did not have any thoughts of success. He just curled his lips. It's not like they were watching a monkey show. Why were they so curious? However, after listening to the rules of the challenge, Zhang Xiaohua still had a plan in his heart. Nonsense. The result of 9 matches being a draw in the first stage. No matter what, he should have some experience in fighting a draw. If this third stage, he still used the guerrilla tactics of Big Dipper Magical Fist and Ethereal Steps, this draw would not be 90% certain. Thinking that he would be able to pass the third stage, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but smile. The farce in this world was really not a small number. He Tianshu and Zhang Xiaohu also looked at each other and smiled. They were also confident in Zhang Xiaohua's chances of a draw. Zhang Xiaohua and the other two's footsteps were still a little slow. When they wanted to move, the 5 stages in the square had already been surrounded by many people. Moreover, there were already 5 commoner first stage disciples floating up. To say that this Misty school was really worthy of the name Misty. Every disciple's qigong was powerful. Not only the 2 disciples competing on the stage, but the disciples below the stage had already occupied an advantageous position. Zhang Xiaohua and the rest could only tiptoe and gather at the back. At this time, the 5 pairs of disciples on the stage had already started fighting. Although the 5 new commoner first stage disciples had just advanced, they were after all-powerful figures. These 5 commoner second stage disciples were specially selected by Zhang Chengyue and the rest. They were not the top disciples and only represented the average strength of the commoner second stage disciples. Therefore, other than the disciple number 57 on the 5th stage who was gradually losing the upper hand, the other 4 stages were still in a situation where they were evenly matched. Looking at the stage, the disciples who had passed with him were fighting with their real swords and spears. There were no tricks used. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think of 2 words from the bottom of his heart. Fierce. At the same time, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the 5th stage on the left. Although there was no suspense in the battle on the stage, he was still unwilling to leave. There were many disciples who were looking forward to the 3rd battle. In his heart, he was also hesitant about whether or not he should use guerrilla tactics on the stage. If it was about his true strength, he was most likely inferior to this commoner second stage disciple. After all, his internal strength was more than a year more than a first stage disciple. The application of skills was also many times more. At most, he could last for 2 incense sticks a time. Any longer, and he would be exhausted. It was difficult to guarantee that he would not be kicked off the stage. But if he used the ethereal steps, he could only blindly move around. When the time came, Although he could win with a draw, the difference in the martial arts of the competition was not just a little bit. Even compared to the commoner first stage disciple who was at a disadvantage on the stage, he was still inferior. Presumably, he would be sneered at by the disciples below the stage. If that was the case, he would not want to enter the Misty Mountain Villa in the future. To fight or not to fight, to lose or to draw, these were all questions. The time for 3 incense sticks of time was quickly up. Except for the 5th stage, where the commoner first stage disciple failed, the other 4 stages all won or drew and directly obtained the qualification of the commoner's 2nd stage disciple. Not to mention the disciples below the stage who were discussing with each other. Even the higher-ups under the reed mat shelter were pointing at the few disciples on the stage and whispering to each other. The reed mat shelter was right in front of the assembly hall's door. It was beside the stairs and was 1 head higher than the stage. It was just right to see all the battles on the 5 stages clearly. When O Peng, Shui Yupeng, Aunt Qin, and the others saw that the young disciples were so energetic and had good results, they were all full of smiles and nodded their heads frequently. The other members of the Misty Six Tigers, as well as the Hall Master of the Divine Machine Hall, would occasionally lower their heads and say something to the disciples below. They must have taken a fancy to the aptitude of these young disciples and wanted to recruit them into the hall. After the first round of challenges ended, the second round began. The situation in the 5 arenas was basically the same as the previous round. Except for the 5th arena, the other challengers were all at an advantage. Thinking about it, the challengers were all ranked at the top. If they couldn't win, then it wouldn't make any sense. Perhaps there would be some suspense for the challengers at the bottom. While everyone was thinking, the time for 3 incense sticks of time was up. It was still the 5th stage's challenger, number 59, who lost. At this time, the disciples in front of the 5th arena gradually lost their curiosity. Contestant number 50 had already been defeated. Contestant number 250, even if he was strong, probably couldn't beat contestant number 50. Even if he was lucky enough to enter the 3rd stage, if he couldn't provide any surprises, what was the point of looking at him? However, since they had already missed the exciting battles on the other stages, there was still one more battle on the 5th stage. Everyone would make do and watch to see what kind of superhuman number 250. On the 5th stage, the 2nd stage disciples who were waiting to challenge had already jumped onto the stage. Number 250, Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu, who had a ladder on his back, were squeezing through the crowd and overcoming all difficulties to get onto the stage. At this time, a disciple flew into the reed mat shelter and walked to Zhang Qingyue. He lowered his head and said something. Zhang Qingyue's face changed greatly. With a gloomy face, he waved his hand and let the disciple go. He thought for a moment, then quickly walked to O Peng's side and whispered a few words in his ear. O Peng did the same. His face darkened for a moment, then returned to normal. He frowned deeply and then said a few words to Zhang Qingyue. Zhang Qingyue nodded and quickly walked out of the reed mat shelter. He jumped onto the 1st stage and said loudly, "Disciples, our Misty School has guests from afar. Let's end the martial arts exhibition here. After we send off the guests, let's continue the competition." Of the 5 stages, other than Zhang Xiaohua, the other 4 had just jumped onto the stage and could only jump back down. Zhang Xiaohua was squeezing her way forward. She stopped and smiled at Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Second brother, let's go back. It's a good thing you said it early. If you waited until I was halfway up, wouldn't it waste my energy?" At this moment, Zhang Qingyue waved his hand toward a certain direction and made a gesture. 9 consecutive bell tolls could be heard. It was the bell used by the ethereal sect to welcome their guests. The disciples in the square were also well trained. They stood by the side obediently, leaving a path from the meeting hall to the outside. Inside the reed mat shelter, O Peng heard the sound of the bell. He stood up, looked around, and walked out first. The others followed him and walked out of the square along the path left by the disciples. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu had never been in such a situation before. They didn't know where to put their hands and feet. Luckily, He Tianshu had been following behind them. He reached out and pulled them to stand in the middle of the group of disciples. They weren't tall, and their positions weren't in the middle. Naturally, they didn't stand out, and no one could see anything wrong with them. When O Pong and the others left the square, the disciples were still standing with their arms folded. They didn't show any signs of leaving. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Captain He, what's going on?" Tianshu looked around and whispered in her ear, "I think people from the other sects in Jianghu came to visit. 9 bell tolls is an extremely high standard. I think it's people from the large sects like the Dalan Temple, Fragrance Sect, or the Righteous Alliance. Maybe it's the leader of one Jianfeng or the other sections." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "Could it be their leader?" Tianshu shook his head and said, "I don't think so. If their leader came, the bell wouldn't just be 9 tolls, but 18. This is our Misty School's highest standard for welcoming guests." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "How was the standard for welcoming guests related to the sound of the bell?" Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, "This rule has been passed down since a long time ago. I don't know the specific meaning behind it. I only know that if a top figure of a top sect is to ring the bell 18 times, the highest standard is 9 times. A top figure of a sect that is on par with our ethereal sect is to ring the bell 6 times or 3 times. A normal sect is to ring the bell 6 times or 3 times. If the leader of a sect comes, the bell tolls won't be used." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and seemed to understand. In short, the bell tolls are used to differentiate the status of the guests and show respect. "But why isn't it 10 or 20? Tianshu said, "Didn't I tell you? This is a rule passed down from a long time ago. As for why it's 9 tolls and not 10, I don't know either. Besides," at this point, Tianshu paused for a moment. He looked a little hesitant as he said, "During the martial arts exhibition, our Misty sect will not receive any visitors. This is a rule that everyone in the Jianghu knows. But why did a distinguished guest come to visit us today? Is there some other meaning behind this?" Zhang Xiaohua said in surprise, "Really, Captain He, no one has ever come before?" Tianshu nodded and said, "That's right. In my memory, no one has ever come to visit. I also read in some sect books that a long time ago, there were some arrogant people in Jianghu who wanted to use the Misty School as a springboard to show off in the martial arts exhibition to attract the attention of the people in Jianghu. During the martial arts exhibition, they came to visit our Misty School. However, before they could enter the Misty Mountain Villa, they were beaten until they pissed their pants and went straight back. How could they enter the mountain gate?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Maybe the leaders of other sects came on a whim and came to watch the competition." Tianshu still shook his head and said, "The Misty School's martial arts exhibition is an internal competition. It's a competition to show the strength of the sect. How could we let other sects see such a secret? Moreover, our Misty School's rule of not receiving guests during the martial arts exhibition is well known in Jianghu. The leaders of other sects wouldn't do such a foolish thing." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu, who was at the side, interrupted, "Since 9 bell chimes have been released, and sect leader O has personally gone out to welcome him, he must be an extremely important person in the Jianghu. Such a person would not interfere with our martial arts exhibition for no reason. I think there must be something going on inside." Tianshu also nodded in agreement. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the empty road and said, "Forget it. As the ancients said, if it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. What's going to come will come. Let's wait for them to come. Let's wait and see." Post in the comment section and give 15 points as a reward. I don't know how to give more. Chapter 188. After a long time, Zhang Xiaohua was getting impatient. But when he looked around, the Misty School disciples didn't have any other expressions on their faces. They just stood there respectfully, occasionally glancing at the end of the aisle. Zhang Xiaohua immediately felt deep respect for the disciples around him. It was a great compliment to the Misty School in his heart. What was this? This was the result of the Misty School's daily education. Even without the presence of the higher-ups, they were still extremely well-behaved. Zhang Xiaohua was ashamed of his inferiority. Just as Zhang Xiaohua's imagination was running wild, he saw that the disciples' eyes were focused on the aisle. Zhang Xiaohua also quickly looked in that direction. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua's height was still too short. Many disciples blocked his view. It wasn't until the guests came closer that he could clearly see who had come to visit during the Misty School's martial arts practice. The person walking in front of the crowd wasn't the Misty School's respected sect leader, but an old monk with gray hair and beard. Oh, there was a mistake. His beard and eyebrows were gray. Next to him was Peng, who had a smiling face. Although the old monk was old, he still looked hale and hearty. His back was very straight, and his eyes were squinted. When he looked around, there was a flash of light. From time to time, he would look at the disciples in the square. His expression was very arrogant, and he didn't have the inherent benevolence of a monk. Peng whispered something to the old monk. The old monk nodded slightly, but didn't reply. Behind Peng was the Misty School's deputy sect leader, Shui Yuping. Zhang Xiaohua didn't recognize her, but Zhang Xiaohua keenly noticed that Shui Yuping's expression was a little awkward, a little angry, and a little helpless. Beside Shui Yuping were the 6 Misty Tigers and other elders. Behind them were the Misty School's hall masters and a group of bald monks of different ages. The slightly older monks put their palms together and said something to the people accompanying them. The younger ones were even younger than Zhang Xiaohua. Although their palms were also put together, their eyes were darting around, curiously looking at the Misty School's square. When a group of people walked past, Zhang Xiaohua elbowed He Tianshu and asked softly, "Leader He, where do you think these monks came from? What are they doing at the Misty School?" He Tianshu lowered his voice and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, lower your voice. Their internal energy is profound. Be careful not to be heard." Zhang Xiaohua closed her mouth and nodded quickly. He Tianshu said, "The old monk in front is the Dalan Temple's law-enforcing Elder Changgang. He's a well-known figure in Jianghu. I heard that his martial arts are profound, and he doesn't hold back when he fights. He's also a vengeful person. Not only is everyone in the Dalan Temple afraid of him, but even in Jianghu, he's terrifying. This time, he actually brought a group of monks to our Misty School. It seems like he's holding a grudge." "Ah, I see." Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have understood something as he said, "They're vengeful. Captain He, I believe your ethereal sect must have offended them. That's why they came to visit during the martial arts exhibition." He Tianshu shook his head and said, "I don't know about that. I'm just a small leader in the pharmacy hall. I only care about my own herbs. How could I care about such important matters?" Zhang Xiaohua and the others were making wild guesses in the square. Peng accompanied Changgung to the reed mat shelter. Peng invited Changgung to take a seat. Changgung opened his eyes and looked at him. He said, "Chief O, you don't have to be so polite. This is your Misty School. Naturally, I can't sit here. Please take a seat." Peng was humble again and said with a smile, "Elder Changgung is a senior in the martial arts world. I've admired you for a long time. Counting from my master, you're also my senior. It's only right for you to sit here. Please don't be so polite." Changgung waved his hand and said, "I'm just an outsider. There's no need to treat me with such etiquette. Moreover, seniority in the martial arts world is very messy. Chief O, you don't have to mind. Chief O's status in the sect is much higher than mine. It's more suitable for Chief O to sit here." Peng hurriedly said that he did not dare and declined several times. However, Monk Changgung was adamant about not taking a seat. After a few rounds, Peng could no longer decline and had no choice but to take a seat. Monk Changgung took the seat of honor. The other older monks also took a seat. The other monks stood behind them in order. After the Dalan Temple's monks sat down, the Misty School's people sat down in order. However, Wen Wenhai, Lu Mingyue, Xue Qing, and the other disciples stood behind them. After everyone sat down, a disciple served them fragrant tea. Peng smiled and said, "Elder, please have some tea. This fragrant tea is made from the tea tree unique to our sect's Misty Peak. Please have a taste." Changgung didn't stand on ceremony. He tasted 2 mouthfuls and said, "It's not bad." Although it can't be compared to the Buddhist tea of our Dalan temple, it can still leave a fragrance in the mouth. It's quite good. These words sounded very disrespectful, but the Misty School's people in the shed didn't say anything. It wasn't clear if they were too angry to say anything or if they were touched by his words. Shui Yuping looked at the tepid crowd and said, I've heard that the Dalan Temple's people are all eminent monks who have achieved the Tao. The world is empty. Why are you so greedy for food? Chang Gung gave Shui Yuping a sideways glance and asked in a low voice, May I know who this is? Oh, Peng hurriedly introduced. This is Shui Yuping from our Misty School. She's the deputy chief. When Monk Chang Gung heard this, he seemed to have already understood. An imperceptible smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he said, An eminent monk who has attained the Tao naturally does not desire good food. I have never flaunted myself as someone who has attained the Tao. Shui Yuping's heart skipped a beat when she heard the ambiguous words. She lowered her eyebrows and didn't say anything. Openg also knew that things were not going well. He smiled apologetically and said, Great Master Chang Gung, you've never been to our sect before. Would you like to stay for a few more days so that we can do our best as hosts? Chang Gung still said in the same tone, That's not necessary. I'm here to admire the grandeur of your sect's martial arts exhibition. I'm also here to exchange martial arts with your sect. You and I are both big sects in Jianghu. Exchanges can also promote the development of martial arts and strengthen the friendship between the two sections. Don't you think so, Chifo? Openg thought. Oh no, he's really here to cause trouble. However, he didn't dare to show any change in his expression. He only said, The Dalan Temple's position in Jianghu is something that our Misty School can't compare to. It's better to learn from the Dalan Temple. I don't dare to say anything about this exchange. Chang Gung waved his hand and said, We're all from the martial arts world, so we know each other's background. Chifo, you don't have to be so polite. This time, I've only brought a few good-for-nothing monks to exchange pointers with your sect's plain-clothed disciples. They're not worthy of your attention. Openg was stunned. He asked, What do you mean? Chang Gung explained, The Dalan Temple and the Misty School are both sects with inheritances. We've known each other for thousands of years, so there's no need for us to fight to the death. Moreover, with our skills, if we want to exchange pointers, there's no need to be so calculative in this martial arts exhibition. I heard that your sect's martial arts exhibition is an advancement competition, so I brought a group of disciples of similar age to join the fun. Let the younger disciples compete with each other while you and I watch from the side. Isn't that great? Openg came to a realization. The Dalan Temple's action was probably to test the strength of the ethereal sect's low-ranking disciples. Winning or losing this competition was inappropriate. If he won, he would gain face and boost the strength of his sect's disciples, but it would also attract the attention of the Dalan Temple. However, if he lost, he would be slapping his own face. Others had come to his doorstep to bully him. If news of this spread to the pugilistic world, the ethereal sect's reputation would be ruined. But now, Chang Gung had come in such a hurry that he was caught off guard. He didn't have enough time to prepare. Fortunately, they had only just started the plain-clothed disciples challenge. The other stages hadn't started yet, so he had to deal with them first. Openg winked at Zhang Qingyue and said to Chang Gung, Master, you've come at a bad time. The plain-clothed disciples challenge is coming to an end. Now, there's only one competition in each arena. How do you plan to participate? Chang Gung squeezed out a smile and said, It's fine as long as there's a competition. I brought a few young children to test their skills in the arena. It's also a way to improve their relationship with your sect's disciples. Openg saw that Chang Gung was insistent on the competition and felt helpless. He probed, Master, what are the rules for this competition? Chang Gung flicked his sleeves and said, Since it's a competition, there can't be any injuries. If there's a mistake, it'll be considered a failure and you'll be punished severely. There's no time limit for this competition. Only a victory or defeat can arouse the desire to win. Chifo, what do you think? Openg smiled bitterly and said, Master, you're right. Friendship comes first, competition comes second. Of course, there can't be any injuries. However, what I mean is on my arena, there are plainclothes disciples challenge and plainclothes disciples challenge. How will your sex disciples participate? Oh, I see. Changgung thought for a moment and said, that's easy. Let the plainclothes disciples compete with our disciples. If our disciples are lucky enough to win, it'll be considered that your sex plainclothes disciples have failed the challenge. If your sex plainclothes disciples win, it'll be considered that your sex disciples have passed the challenge. What do you think? When Openg heard this, he felt indignant. Where did this come from? You've already said that Shi brought a low-level disciple here, which is the standard of our plainclothes disciples. Now, you want to replace our plainclothes disciples to test the standard of our plainclothes disciples? If our plainclothes disciples win, it'll be considered a success. What kind of success is your success? But if our plainclothes disciples lose, it'll be good. Our plainclothes disciples are no match for the Dalan Temple's low-level disciples. Regardless of whether the Dalan Temple's monks win or lose, our Misty School's disciples won't be at an advantage. Although Openg was cursing in his heart, he still had a smile on his face. Although his martial arts had improved greatly, and he was confident that he could fight against this famous monk, it would have a huge impact on the Misty School. For the time being, the Misty School didn't have the strength to fight against a super sect like the Dalan Temple. What they needed to do now was to not attract their attention and develop rapidly. Only when their strength reached a certain level would they reveal their ferocious side. If they were to fall out with Monk Changgung now, the ethereal sect will be facing an unprecedented calamity if their trump card was exposed. Thinking of this, Openg asked again, then what are the rules for the other disciples' matches? Changgung chuckled and said, let's see how the younger generation matches up first. How about that? Openg nodded and said, I'll follow the master's instructions. Then he instructed Zhang Qingyue, according to the master's instructions, go and make the arrangements. After Zhang Qingyue saluted, he said to the group of young monks behind him, disciples who want to participate in our sect's level 1 cotton robe challenge, please follow me. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 young monks walked out from the group of young monks. They looked to be around 10 years old, which was the same age as the Misty School's disciples. Looking at the situation, Changgung must have already made arrangements. Zhang Qingyue couldn't help but think, it seems like this bald donkey came prepared. The remaining disciples of the Misty School are going to make a fool of themselves. Although the rules had been set that there couldn't be any casualties, the possibility of an accident happening in the match was too high. If there was a mistake, it would only be considered a failure, and they would be severely punished. What kind of punishment was this severe punishment? It didn't seem like it was explicitly stated just now. Even if there weren't any casualties, as long as you were thrown off the arena in a sorry state, not only the disciples themselves, but even the Misty School's reputation would be lost. Zhang Qingyue led the 3 young monks to the front of the arena and said, young masters, there are 5 arenas. There are 5 matches for the Misty School's disciples. You could choose any one of them. After saying that, he floated onto the arena and used his inner strength to explain the rules of the match to the disciples in the square. If it were any other day, Zhang Qingyue's words would definitely cause a commotion. However, there were outsiders present now. It was obvious that they were here to cause trouble. The disciples already had a common hatred, so why would they break the rules? Seeing that the disciples weren't as noisy as he expected, Zhang Qingyue nodded and said, let's invite the disciples of the 5 arenas who are ready to challenge the Misty School's disciples to come up. After saying that, 3 bald monks jumped up from the arena and somersaulted a few times before landing on arenas number 1, number 4, and number 5. Seeing that the 3 monks were standing still, the disciples of number 2 and number 3 also floated onto the arena. When these people stood on the arena, 4 figures flew out from the crowd and landed on arenas number 1 to number 4. These 4 figures seemed to be showing off their lightness skills, but also seemed to be deliberately provoking them. Their figures flew high and fluttered, causing a burst of cheers from below the arena. In fact, if these 4 disciples' lightness skills were good, it might not be so. It was just that they looked better than the bald monks on the arena, so naturally they would be cheered. Moreover, the Misty School was known for its lightness skills. It was better than the Dalan Temple, so it could be considered as taking the lead and suppressing the monks in terms of momentum. Zhang Chengyue stood on the first arena and smiled at the disciple in front of him. The disciple had a simple and honest face, thick limbs and a small face, but was almost as tall as him. He asked, "Number 12, what's your name?" Number 12 replied in a muffled voice, "I'm young Eagle Cousin's disciple, Tang Shi." When Zhang Qingyue heard this, he nodded and said, "Good, Tang Shi, I'll remember your name. Are you ready?" Tang Shi nodded. Zhang Chengyue said in a clear voice, "Good, let the competition begin." After saying that, he was about to float down when he heard a voice from the side. Wait, I haven't gone up yet. Wait a moment." The disciples on arenas number 1 to 4 were already prepared. When Zhang Qingyue gave the order, the 4 pairs of disciples had already started competing. How could they have the leisure to listen to the sounds from the other arenas? Only Zhang Qingyue looked at the 5th arena to the side in puzzlement. Of course, on that arena, there was a monk wearing a white monk robe, standing alone. He was puzzled with his palms together and muttering something under his breath as he looked down the arena. Zhang Chengyue looked down the arena again, at the place where the voice came from, and couldn't help but be even more surprised. Weren't the 2 brothers Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu running over from the crowd? Zhang Xiaohu was carrying something like a ladder on his back. Zhang Xiaohua was running in front and had already reached the bottom of the arena. Then, under the watchful eyes of all the disciples, Zhang Xiaohu put the ladder on the side of the arena. Zhang Xiaohua used both hands and feet to nimbly and lightly climb up the arena. Zhang Chengyue, who was standing at the edge of the first arena, was dumbfounded. He didn't know what this meant. He used his qinggong to jump onto the 5th arena, frowned and scolded. "Zhang Xiaohua, what are you doing here? This is the challenge of the martial arts exhibition." Before Zhang Qingyue finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and asked in disbelief, "Could it be that you are the legendary number 250? Zhang Xiaohua touched the back of her head and said embarrassedly, "That's me. I am contestant number 250. Zhang Qingyue was a little puzzled and asked, "Why didn't you stay at Huanxi Mountain Manor? Why did you come to the martial arts exhibition?" But just as he asked, he immediately said, "Forget it. Now isn't the time to talk about the reason. You've heard what I said just now, right? Now your opponent has changed to this young master from the Dalan Temple. If you can defeat him, then even if the challenge is successful, although you won't be able to truly become a commoner 2nd-ranked disciple in my Misty School, but with the sect leader, I reckon you won't be lacking in benefits. Are you confident?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she immediately puffed out her small chest and said, I'm not confident." Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, Good, as expected of." But before he finished speaking, he suddenly understood and hurriedly changed his words. "What? You're actually not confident?" Zhang Xiaohua said in shame, If it's a draw, then I have some confidence. But if I win, it's really hard to say." When Zhang Qingyue heard this, he thought to himself, "This is the truth. He's only been practicing martial arts for a few years, even younger than a commoner 1st-rank disciple. How can he be a match for these carefully selected disciples of the Dalan Temple?" Immediately, he patted his shoulder and said, "No matter, we can compete in style and skill." Finished speaking, he jumped off the arena and walked towards the reed mat shelter. Everyone's comments have been added. Thank you for your participation. Also, for these few chapters, I need to fill a hole. Which one do you think it will be? Please feel free to comment. It's still the same old rules. To be honest, I don't know about other rewards. Hee. Please bookmark. Thank you. Chapter 189. After Zhang Qingyue walked away, Zhang Xiaohua turned around and saluted the little monk in snow-white clothes. "I'm Zhang Xiaohua from Huanxi Mountain Villa. Please enlighten me." The little monk also put his palms together and said, I'm Yuan from the Law Enforcement Hall of the Dalan Temple. Please enlighten me. Zhang Xiaohua saw that her opponent had also finished saluting. She crossed her fists and was about to attack with the Big Dipper magical fist when she heard Na Liao say, "Please wait." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked, "Is there anything else?" Na Liao asked, "Aren't you a disciple of the Misty School?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said yes. "How do you know?" Na Liao smiled and said, "I heard what you said to senior brother Zhang just now. And didn't you introduce yourself as Huan Shi Mountain Villa?" Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that she really didn't pay attention to these details. Then Na Liao asked again, "Since you're not a disciple of the Misty School, how are you qualified to participate in the martial arts exhibition?" Zhang Xiaohua blinked and said mysteriously, "This is a matter between our Huanxi Mountain Villa and the Misty School. It's confidential. Please forgive me for not being able to answer." Na Liao seemed to be endless and asked again, "Just now Shu Zhang asked you if you had the confidence to defeat me. Why did you say that you only had the confidence to draw?" Zhang Xiaohua said angrily, "You little monk are so unreasonable. What I say to others is my privacy. You eavesdropped without my permission. Isn't that an invasion of my privacy? Even now, you're still curious about the reason. Do you want to compete or not? Look at the other rings, they're already fighting." Na Liao said kindly, "Know yourself and know your enemy. I also know your situation. Later, I'll tell you about me. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "I'm not interested." Na Liao said, "My information is a secret. Do you want to hear it?" Hearing the word secret, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. She said, "Well, you have to tell me your secret after that." Yuan nodded in agreement. Zhang Xiaohua said, "Because I participated in the martial arts exhibition and competed in 12 matches. 10 of them ended in a draw, so I said that I was very confident in a draw. Do you understand?" Hearing this, Yuan Liao rolled his eyes and casually asked, "Then how did you enter the third stage with such poor results?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't care and said, "I was the worst one to enter the second round. My number was 250, and I was the last one to enter the third round. It was all due to luck that I got a bye. Do you know that?" Yuan pursed his lips and said, "I understand. All right, let me ask you one last question." Zhang Xiaohua was extremely anxious and said, "Are you done yet? Do you really not want to compete?" Yuan Liao smiled and said, "This is the last question. You only need to answer yes or no." Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, "It's really the last question." Yuan Liao asked, "Do you not know Qigong?" Zhang Xiaohua's face turned red. She could actually use the levitation technique last time, but it was still very immature. If she said no now, it would be a bit far-fetched. Zhang Xiaohua could only nod and say yes. Then, she quickly changed the topic and asked, "Tell me your secret." Na Liao smiled mysteriously and said, "My secret is very simple. Don't look at me coming to the 5th arena. My martial arts is the highest among the 3. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua laughed and naturally looked at the other arenas that were in the midst of fighting. She said, "I don't believe it. You don't know me." Na Liao did not correct her and only said, "Since you don't believe it, then fine. Number 250 Zhang Xiaohua, take this move of mine." After that, he immediately floated up. His figure was like a wisp of smoke and immediately arrived in front of Zhang Xiaohua. His figure left a few blurry afterimages in the air. His Qigong was actually extremely brilliant. Zhang Xiaohua secretly knew that it was not good. She said, "You little monk, you actually cheated." As soon as her words fell, Yuan Liao had already closed in. His hands were like playing a pipa. He waved his fingers and pointed at all the acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. In just one move, he had sealed 36 major acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. Then, Yuan Liao's figure flashed, and he appeared behind Zhang Xiaohua. He stood tall with his hands behind his back and looked at the crowded heads under the arena with a lonely face. At that time, the bald little monk Yuan Liao, wearing clothes whiter than snow, floated at the edge of the arena. The only thing missing was a swaying fan, and it would be even more perfect. His charm was comparable to that of a talented scholar. He was simply the legendary jade, tree, facing the wind. In fact, one could not help but say that Yuan Liao was showing off. He had the ability to show off. Not to mention how divine his body was. Just this exquisite technique of sealing acupoints was something that few of the Misty School's commoners could compare to. As everyone knew, the technique of sealing acupoints required internal energy to be injected into the body's acupoints in order to produce an effect. If one could condense their internal energy into the size of a needle, without 10 years of hard practice, it was simply impossible to achieve. In the Misty School, only the commoner fourth-ranked disciples, whose internal energy cultivation had reached a certain level, would pass the internal energy assessment and be taught according to the circumstances. This was also the reason why Zhang Xiaohua had never encountered an acupoint sealing technique in the commoner first-rank competition. The ethereal sect also had some talented disciples who were able to reach the standard of the acupoint sealing technique when they were at the third rank of commoner clothes. However, those who were as proficient as Yuan Liao and had such deep inner strength were hard to find. Only the fourth rank of commoner clothes could compare to him. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Yuan Liao was the most powerful of the three. It was no wonder that he stood to the side, allowing the wind to blow at his monk robe. His face was filled with loneliness. Geniuses were lonely. Just as Yuan Liao was standing at the edge of the arena in satisfaction, freely showing off his naked body, he felt the increasingly amazed gazes of the Misty School disciples below the arena. He also felt the increasingly quiet atmosphere around the fifth arena. He enjoyed it very much. He thought to himself, what a bunch of country bumpkins. Have they never been geniuses before? Sai, what kind of realm was this? What kind of subduing was this? Wasn't this the realm that Elder Chang'an wanted him to reach? However, Yuan Liao, who was intoxicated in his self-satisfaction, suddenly discovered a trace of disharmony. Yuan Liao discovered that the increasingly astonished gazes of the crowd below the stage weren't focused on him, but had instead bypassed him and concentrated behind him. Suddenly, he felt a trace of unease. Just as he was about to turn around to take a look, he heard a loud shout from behind him, "Get down." Following that, he felt a huge force coming from his buttocks. He felt a foot kick his buttocks, kicking him straight out of the arena. Yuan Liao cursed inwardly and immediately wanted to get into a horse stance to stabilize his body. However, the strength of the kick on his buttocks was too great. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stand still. In an instant, his figure had already fallen outside the arena. However, at this moment, the little monk, Yuan Liao, used the tip of his right foot to tap the instep of his left foot. The inner strength in his dantian expanded and his entire body rose up. With a somersault, he landed on the arena. The disciples below the arena could not help but exclaim in unison. However, before he could land on the arena, he saw a small fist suddenly appear in front of him, smashing towards his face. Yuan Liao sneered. He raised his palm and was about to place it on the fist, preparing to use the force to leap back onto the arena. However, just as he was about to place his palm on the fist retracted and another fist struck toward his face. At this moment, Yuan Liao's old strength had dissipated and his new strength had yet to be generated. The circulation of his inner strength had also stagnated. His figure stopped there. If he wanted to return to the arena, he could only place his hand on the fist. Yuan Liao made up his mind, gritted his teeth, and stretched out another hand towards the fist. This time, the fist did not retract. It was still straight as it struck towards Yuan Liao's palm. Yuan Liao snickered in his heart. If his palm were to meet this fist, even if he could not return to the arena, he would still pull him down. It was hard to say who would win or lose. However, when the fist and palm met, an even greater force than before immediately struck Yuan Liao down. Normally, if Yuan Liao's inner strength was endless or if he was standing on flat ground, Yuan Liao had hundreds and thousands of ways to dodge. However, at this moment, his new strength had yet to be generated. His inner strength had stagnated and his figure was still in midair. How could there be any other outcome? Yuan Liao's white figure was helplessly struck down to the ground. The disciples below arena number 5 were baffled by what they were seeing. The two of them on this arena were muttering something to each other. The battles in the other arenas had been going on for a long time, but they had yet to start. Furthermore, as the two of them were chatting, this number 250 from Ethereal Sect was looking at the other arenas. Just as he was distracted, the little monk in white executed his acupoint sealing technique and sealed all 36 acupoints of his opponent. The disciples who were watching were shocked. What kind of genius was this? To be able to seal acupoints at such a young age. However, what shocked them was yet to come. The young monk who could strike acupoints stood naked at the edge of the arena. As for number 250, who had his acupoint struck, he looked left and right as though nothing had happened. He looked up and down and scratched his head. Then, he looked at the young monk who was standing at the edge of the arena. It was unknown what had happened to make the young monk give up his attack and take the initiative to stand at the edge of the arena. Facing the astonished gazes of the disciples below the arena, number 250 shrugged his shoulders and made a face. Then, with a loud shout, he kicked the young monk out of the arena with the wild goose landing on sand style. When the young monk in white landed helplessly on the ground, the disciples beneath arena number 5 could not believe their eyes. Was this a competition or an act? However, the young monk from the Dalan Temple had indeed landed on the ground. In other words, number 250, who was rumored to be the weakest in arena number 5, was the first to kick the monk from the Dalan Temple out of the arena. What kind of realm was this? The disciples beneath arena number 5 were stunned for a moment. Then, they no longer cared about the sect rules and their reputation as they cheered thunderously. The thunderous cheers actually affected the competition in the other 4 arenas. Everyone was distracted. Even Tang Shi, who had been at a disadvantage in arena number 1, was inspired by the familiar cheers. He actually gained the upper hand in one fell swoop. The more he fought, the braver he became. In the end, he finally forced his opponent out of the arena and obtained his second victory. In the other 2 arenas, the contestants from a Misty School were not in the mood to accept the challenge. They all passed the challenge. Only the contestant from arena number 4 was indeed much weaker than the young monk from the Dalan Temple. That was why he failed his challenge. The Misty School's achievement was beyond everyone's expectations. As soon as Zhang Xiaohua climbed onto the arena, O Peng and Monk Changgung had already noticed the commotion in arena number 5. Monk Changgung did not need to be mentioned. That Yuan Liao was his trump card, so it was definitely the focus of his attention. As for O Peng, he felt that Monk Changgung was especially looking at arena number 5. Whatever the enemy desired was also his own desire. Since you're paying attention to the 5th arena, I naturally have to pay more attention to the 5th arena. Just the fact that the challenger of the 5th arena had not jumped onto the arena for a long time already made O Peng very angry. How could he not take a few more glances? O Peng even wondered if it was because the last ranked disciple did not dare to accept the challenge due to stage fright. However, when Zhang Xiaohua agilely climbed onto the arena, O Peng and Monk Changgung finally understood what was going on. As a result, their thoughts changed greatly. O Peng's mood was one of astonishment and joy. The reason for his astonishment was naturally because he did not know how this youth from the Huanxi Mountain Manor came to the martial arts exhibition. Moreover, he even made it to the 3rd stage of the competition. Therefore, when he heard Zhang Qinghua mention arena number 5, he felt a little puzzled. He still had some understanding of Zhang Xiaohua's background. It was already praiseworthy for him to be able to make it to the 3rd stage. If he was not the last, who else could it be? The reason for his joy was also very simple. Since Monk Changgung was paying attention to the arena, it was naturally a battle that he was confident in. Not to mention, Tianji horse racing was avoiding the weak points and highlighting the strong points. Zhang Xiaohua's last place had obviously attracted the attention of an expert from the Dalan Temple. Although he would fail the challenge, O Peng was still happy to see the inferior horse lose to the opponent's superior horse. Moreover, this horse was not his to begin with. What did its life or death have to do with Openg? Openg was secretly happy, but Monk Chonggung's expression was ugly. This little monk Yuan Liao was just as he said. He was the most powerful among the few little monks. Monk Chonggung wanted to use him to humiliate the young disciples of the Misty School. As soon as he stepped onto the arena, he encountered an opponent that could not be any weaker. Of course, how could a disciple who did not even know Qinggong be weaker than him? Although he could easily win this match, he had also lost a great opportunity. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua and Yuan Liao began chatting like old friends. Monk Chonggung, who was below the arena, rolled his eyes and pondered for a moment before saying to Openg, "Chifo, this old monk suddenly thought of a problem. The rules we talked about just now seem a little inappropriate. This old monk would like to make some changes." Openg's heart skipped a beat. He carefully asked, "Master, how do you want to make changes?" Monk Chonggung smiled and said, "What we talked about just now was the result of a match. The loser naturally cannot compete again. But what about the disciple who won? Can he still continue with the following matches?" Openg secretly gritted his teeth and thought, "This old bald donkey, you are the one who set the rules. What can I say? You didn't even say anything about the following matches. What do you want me to say? Aren't you just afraid that after seeing your disciple encounter a weak opponent, you won't be able to compete again after one match?" Thus, Openg pretended to be thinking and said, "Then let's do as Master says. If I lose a match, I won't be able to participate in the following matches. As for the winner of the match, he can still participate in the following matches." In fact, while Openg was pretending to be thinking, Yuan Liao had already activated his acupoint sealing plan. However, in the eyes of Openg and Monk Chonggung, such skills were not worth mentioning. Therefore, they watched while talking. As for Zhang Xiaohua, she was looking around mischievously. While she was not being sealed, Openg was speaking. When Openg finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua happened to kick Yuan Liao off the arena. The cooperation between the two could not be said to be tacit. On the other hand, when Monk Chonggung saw Yuan Liao being kicked off the arena, he could not help but be alarmed. He actually lost his composure and stood up. However, just as he stood up, he immediately realized that he had lost his composure. When he sat down again, he heard the end of Openg's words. He could not help but be infuriated as he thought to himself, "Did this fellow collude with the little fellow in the arena?" He waited for me to finish speaking before taking action. If he had taken action earlier, I would have been able to set a new rule to allow the loser to be revived. But now that the words have been spoken, it's like spilled water. How can I take them back? Monk Chonggung looked helplessly at the arena and nodded heavily. He was extremely unhappy. Openg looked at Monk Chonggung's embarrassed look and was overjoyed. He thought, could this be the legendary saying, "Man proposes, God disposes"? At this moment, Zhang Qingyue also walked back to the reed mat shelter. He had jumped off the arena, and it was not appropriate for him to use his Qinggong in front of everyone. He could only walk back step by step. His back was facing the arena. Before he could reach the reed mat shelter, the match at Arena 5 had ended. Hearing the thunderous cheers behind him, Zhang Qingyue naturally turned around to look. All he saw was Zhang Xiaohua standing alone and cupping her fists back and forth. She looked smug, and he was puzzled. When Openg saw Zhang Qingyue return, he beckoned him over. Then, he whispered into Zhang Qingyue's ear, "That Zhang something, what's going on?" Zhang Qingyue also whispered into his ear, "It's Zhang Xiaohua. I'm not sure what the reason is. Since I won, I'll ask again in the future." Openg nodded with a smile. Not long after, the matches in the 5 arenas ended. The disciples of the Misty School jumped off the arena. The 3 young monks of the Dalan Temple walked back to the reed mat shelter. The 3 young monks stood in order and bowed to Monk Chonggung with their palms pressed together. 2 of them looked ashamed, while the young monk with snow-white robes was flushed red. Monk Chonggung was a straightforward person. He had a rare smile on his face as he said, it's fine. I brought you to the Misty School to learn from each other. It's to prevent you from closing your doors and not broadening your horizons, thinking that you're the best in the martial arts world. Now that you've competed with the disciples of the Misty School, you've realized that you're just a frog in a well. When you go back, you'll have to work harder so that you won't be disappointed by today's defeat. It was unknown if the three young monks would listen to him. They only bowed and returned to stand behind Monk Changgung. I'm going to add a hole in the next few chapters. Which one do you think it is? There's a post in the book reviews and comment section. Let's see if everyone's guess is right. Please bookmark it. Thank you. Chapter 190. Openg invited Monk Changgung to drink some tea, but he still asked carefully, "Master, what do you think of the following matches?" There was no joy from his victory at all. Just as Monk Changgung was about to speak, a dark and thick young monk suddenly stepped out from behind him. He clasped his palms together and bowed. "Grand Marshal Uncle, I would like to challenge the disciple who defeated junior brother Yuan Liao." Openg found it funny. Seriously, to think that he would pick a fight with such a mediocre youth. He did not say a word and looked at Monk Changgung. The old monk pondered for a moment and said, "Yuan Kong, he just finished a match. If you want to compete, you have to let him rest for a while. Don't you think so?" The dark and thick Yuan Kong stiffened his neck and said, "What's there to rest for? I don't know what evil technique he used to make junior brother Yuan Liao's acupoint sealing technique fail. He only kicked and punched once in the arena. How much strength could he use? The inner strength he used can be replenished after a short rest. Why does he need to rest?" Monk Changgung saw that Yuan Kong was so anxious that he was even doing manual labor. He shouted, "Yuan Kong, what are you talking about? How does your master usually teach you? A Buddhist disciple should have the rules of a Buddhist disciple. Don't talk nonsense." When Yuan Kong heard this, he immediately said, "This disciple knows his mistake." However, he just stood there and did not return. Yuan Kong's evil technique made Openg's heart skip a beat. When Yuan Liao's acupoint was sealed, he was talking to Monk Changgung and did not see it clearly. He only thought that the young monk had made a mistake and failed to seal Zhang Xiaohua's acupoint. Now that he thought about it carefully, there was still something to ponder. Yuan Liao was an outstanding disciple of the Dalan Temple's new generation. His acupoint sealing technique looked abnormally experienced. He must have practiced it for a long time. Zhang Xiaohua was standing still when he was struck. There was no reason for him to make a mistake, but why did he fail? This was truly a problem. Openg glanced at Sky Origin from the corner of his eyes and thought to himself, "This bald donkey must be full of doubts, thinking that it's a trick from my Misty School. I'll ignore him for now and let him have his doubts." But when he saw the dark-skinned monk in front of him, Openg didn't know how to answer him. From the looks of it, Monk Changgung didn't berate him to return and get him to extinguish the thought of challenging Zhang Xiaohua. He probably had the intention of getting back some face from Yuan Kong. Openg had a general idea of Zhang Xiaohua's standards. She had defeated Yuan Kong purely by luck. Yuan Kong had been too confident in his acupoint strikes and had let his guard down, resulting in him being kicked out of the arena. For this Sky Origin to be able to stand out, based on his age, his martial arts must be stronger than Zhang Xiaohua's. Once he went up on stage, he would definitely beat Zhang Xiaohua off the stage. How could he let Zhang Xiaohua accept the challenge? However, if he didn't let Zhang Xiaohua accept the challenge, what reason did he have? Say that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't a disciple of the Misty School? All right, the previous match didn't count. The Misty School still had to send a disciple to face Yuan Kong. Looking at the previous matches, it would be difficult for a rank 1 or even a rank 2 or rank 3 cloth robe to be a match for Yuan Kong. The Misty School's reputation would likely be tarnished. Forget it, I'll let Zhang Xiaohua come out. At most, I'll just admit defeat. After all, he wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. It would be acceptable if he lost. What Openg didn't know was that Yuan Kong had long known that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. However, he didn't know that there was something fishy about it. He didn't know if he should tell Monk Changgung about his defeat. With Openg making up his mind, just as he was about to speak, Monk Changgung made the decision for him. He said to Sky Origin, "Take your leave for now. I'll call you again when that disciple has some rest." Then he turned to ask Peng, gang leader, what do you think? Peng smiled and said, "Master, you're right. I was thinking the same thing." "What a joke. You've already spoken for me. What else can I say?" Immediately, Monk Chong Gung said, "Since the rank 1 match is over, let's have our Dalan Temple's disciple spar with your rank 2 disciple. What do you think?" Peng hurriedly said, "I was thinking the same thing." Just as he finished speaking, 4 slightly older monks walked out from behind Monk Chong Gung. One of them was Sky Origin. When Monk Chong Gung saw this, he waved his hand and said, "Sky Origin, take a rest. You'll spar with that rank 1 disciple later." Sky Origin clasped his hands together and said, "Martial Granduncle, there's no need. It won't be too late to rest after I finish this match." Monk Chong Gung wanted to say more, but Sky Origin said, "That disciple has already competed. If I compete again, it'll be fair. Otherwise, the people of Jianghu will laugh at our Dalan Temple for using numbers to bully someone." Monk Chong Gung nodded and once again revealed a rare smile. He didn't say anything else. Seeing this, Peng couldn't help but frown. Only a fool would believe that the Dalan Temple didn't come prepared. This competition was just a competition. Finding the adult disciples of the Dalan Temple to compete in the arena was the right thing to do. But Monk Chong Gung brought a bunch of young monks to spar with Jianghu's low-level disciples. What kind of rules was this? Peng couldn't figure it out. Moreover, these low-level disciples of his were the real deal. There was no way to fake it. But these young monks in front of him weren't low-level disciples. Who could tell if they were low-level disciples or not? In terms of age, they were about the same, but some of them looked young. Peng wanted to ask if these young monks were really low-level disciples. But even if he had the courage, he still didn't want to offend the Dalan Temple's law enforcement elder. However, Peng thought about it again. Even if the Dalan Temple came to provoke him, they would still be righteous. They wouldn't use high-level disciples to impersonate low-level disciples. Moreover, they had a deep foundation. It was understandable that a few geniuses would emerge among the low-level disciples. Thinking of this, Peng completely extinguished the idea of inquiring. When Zhang Qingyue saw the 4 young monks come out again, he didn't say anything else. He brought them to the arena. The 4 young monks were also straightforward. They each picked one. Sky Origin chose arena number 5. Although he knew that Zhang Xiaohua wouldn't go on stage, perhaps he wanted to familiarize himself with the environment first. There was no need to talk about the 5 challenges on the stage in detail. Only one of them was a genuine 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple challenge. Just like the previous 2nd-tier cotton clothing disciple challenge, the first round of challengers were all ranked higher. Their strength was naturally the best amongst the 2nd-tier cotton clothing disciple. Their martial arts level should be above the average level of the 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple. As for the 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple challenge master, he was a disciple with a mediocre performance amongst the 3rd-tier cotton clothing disciple. In the end, this challenge competition still ended with the challenger winning. As for the other 4 matches between the Misty School and the Dalan Temple, they were a bit tragic. The Dalan Temple's monks came prepared. They had thoroughly studied the martial arts of the Misty School. In addition, the Misty School's disciples were indeed inferior to them. These 4 challenges were all defeated. However, even if this was the case, the spectating disciples were well aware of the situation. Previously, Yuan Liao's pressure point ceiling technique had already rung an alarm bell for them. His level of martial arts against the first-level disciples was already so high, so there was no need to talk about the next one. Although Yuan Liao was kicked off the arena, it was only because he was overconfident. It had nothing to do with the level of his martial arts. This time, Zhang Qingyue didn't rush back. He just stood in a corner of the arena and calmly watched the battle. He hoped that there would be a disciple like Zhang Xiaohua who kicked the Dalan Temple's little monk off the arena. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. After Zhang Qingyue sent the 4 little monks back to the reed mat shelter, the challenges on the 5 arenas continued. Inside the reed mat shelter, Peng saw the results and naturally wasn't surprised. He took a sip of tea and said to Chong Gung with a smile, The Dalan Temple's foundation is really deep. The level of these low-level disciples is much higher than my Misty School's disciples of the same age. This humble one admires them greatly. Chong Gung's face didn't reveal a trace of a smile as he said, "This is nothing. These low-level disciples are only the new generation of the law enforcement hall. They still have a long road ahead of them. If—" He paused for a moment and chose his words carefully before continuing. "If they can't even cross this small gap, how can they be of any use in the future?" These words were very unreasonable. The expressions of the people sitting to O Peng's right had already changed. However, O Peng turned a deaf ear to them and said with a smile, "The Dalan Temple has such outstanding talents. Congratulations. In the future, Jianghu will naturally shine with extraordinary splendor. We look forward to it." After the two finished speaking, they looked at the arena again. The number of people challenging the third level was not as many as the first level. In other words, there were only 10 disciples. In the first round of the competition, all of them were ranked among the top and had the chance to reach the third level. However, because of the Dalan Temple's interference, only one of them passed. Under normal circumstances, the number of disciples who pass the second round will be lower than the number of disciples who pass the first round. However, today was an exception. Out of 5 disciples, 3 of them passed. As for whether they were truly at the third level or if someone had deliberately let them pass, the Misty School's disciples wouldn't pursue the matter. Openg also wouldn't pursue the matter. After the challenge was over, Openg asked Chonggung for his opinion. At this time, there weren't many disciples behind Chonggung who hadn't fought yet. Chonggung pondered for a moment and said, "Sect leader O, this old monk only brought my disciples to your sect to learn from each other. We don't have any intention of having a comprehensive competition. Everyone is only here to exchange martial arts. There are still a few disciples behind this old monk who haven't entered the ring yet, so there's no need for a challenge." Openg smiled and said, "Reverend, you are a guest from afar. This humble one will naturally obey your orders. How will the Reverend arrange it?" Chonggung turned around and said, "Other than Yuan Xing, everyone who hasn't entered the arena can go." After he finished speaking, 5 people walked out from behind him. They were all monks around 16 or 17 years old. Chonggung said to Openg, "Yuan Xing is different from the others. He will fight after he enters the arena. As for the others, Chief O, please make arrangements." When Openg heard this, he was obviously stunned. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at the ordinary-looking monk behind Monk Chonggung. He muttered in his heart, "What kind of trick is this old bald donkey playing?" Zhang Chengyue received O Peng's order and brought the 5 monks to the arena. However, there was a problem when selecting the disciples from the Misty School. The disciples of the Misty School began to be taught weapons from the 3rd rank onwards. The Misty School's swordsmanship was also famous in the pugilistic world. Not to mention the Misty 7 swords, which was the sect's signature swordsmanship. Many of the other swordsmanship were also famous in the pugilistic world. Many of the disciples of the Misty School practiced swordsmanship. As for fist techniques, they only practiced at the 1st or 2nd rank of the pugilistic world. Only a small number of disciples who didn't have the talent to practice swordsmanship chose to practice other methods, such as staff techniques. There weren't many disciples who only practiced fist and palm techniques. In comparison, the Dalan Temple was famous for their fist, palm, and leg techniques. Their weapons were also mainly staffs. They rarely even used sabers, much less swords. Now, the 5 people standing in the arena were all barehanded. They were probably prepared to face their opponents barehanded. Since that was the case, the Misty School couldn't bring out their swords. This was because Chonggung had made it clear that this was only an exchange of martial arts, and not a battle to the death. Actually, wasn't this clearly bullying? Using one's strength against the opponent's weakness. Fortunately, the Misty School was also a large sect in the pugilistic world. Their disciples were also very outstanding. Not long after, they picked out 5 disciples of similar age who were also very skilled in martial arts. While the 5 pairs of disciples were competing in the arena, Peng didn't pay much attention to them. He occasionally glanced at Yuan Xing and secretly analyzed Chang Gung's thoughts. Chang Gung seemed to have noticed this as well. However, he didn't express anything and only watched the competition in the arena with great interest. On the arena, the 10 disciples were fighting in a group. Each of them had their own unique skills and wonderful moves. The 5 Misty School disciples attacked like a tide. The 5 Dalan Temple monks were also like pillars. They used their profound inner energy and simple moves to firmly resist the attacks. It was a stalemate. However, as time passed, the gap between the 10 disciples slowly became apparent. The Dalan Temple disciples' fists were still strong. Every move was made with full force and didn't seem weak. On the other hand, the Misty School disciples were obviously unable to withstand the attacks. It was obvious that their inner energy was insufficient. Most of them chose to wander. In fact, this was very normal. Since the Misty School was named Misty, it was natural for them to excel in Qigong. Every disciple would study Qigong while practicing sword techniques. In a situation where their inner energy was insufficient, they would naturally choose to use Qigong as a tactic. However, even though this lightness skill could allow him to gain the upper hand for a while, it was ultimately not the way of a king. Just from the scene alone, the ethereal sect disciples below the ring already felt a sense of helplessness rising from the bottom of their hearts. They were afraid that they would lose this match again. If the previous few matches were all challenges, it would be a competition between outstanding low-level disciples fighting for a high-level position. If they lost to the Dalan Temple, they could still accept it. They would feel that the young disciples weren't good at martial arts and needed more time to hone their skills. However, this competition in 5 arenas was obviously another way for the Dalan Temple to test or provoke the Misty School. In the huge Misty School, no one was able to defeat the Dalan Temple disciples. If they lost this match, the morale of the Misty School disciples would plummet and they would be ridiculed in Jianghu. However, things didn't change according to one's will. Under the secret support of the hundreds of disciples below the arena, it didn't take long for the 5 arenas to determine the winner. Although the Misty School disciples didn't want to see this, they still lost all 5 matches. Seeing the 5 disciples dejectedly walk back into the crowd, Zhang Qingyue felt very uncomfortable. However, he didn't show any expression on his face. He was still as gentle as ever as he led the 5 arrogant Dalan Temple monks back to the reed mat shelter. In the reed mat shelter, Peng's face was gloomy. No one would be happy about this. In his opinion, even though the Misty School wasn't prepared and hastily accepted the challenge, they should at least be able to win 1 or 2 matches. Now that they had lost all 5 matches, they had lost all face. In fact, Peng didn't have any good intentions towards monk Chang Gung's arrival. Chang Gung was the law-enforcing elder of a super sect. Be it in terms of martial arts, seniority, or connections, Peng couldn't match up to him. If Chang Gung humiliated him a little, Peng could have just endured it. However, he didn't expect them to lose so badly. From the beginning until now, if it wasn't for Zhang Xiaohua taking advantage of Chang Gung's contempt and Tang Shi taking advantage of Zhang Xiaohua's victory, his Misty School would have lost every match. For a sect, this wasn't just a matter of being slapped in the face, it also had many other implications. However, since things had come to this point, Peng could only grit his teeth and swallow his pride. He suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and squeezed out a smile. "Great master, it seems like your esteemed temple is indeed better than my Misty School. However, in terms of nurturing the next generation of disciples, we are inferior. This humble one admires you." Monk Chang Gung shook his head and said, "Sect leader is too modest. Who doesn't know that the Misty School has a deep foundation? The martial arts of these disciples are not worth mentioning. Even if it was your esteemed sect's core disciples or elite disciples, any one of them would be able to defeat 10 of them." When Peng heard this, his heart trembled. He quickly smiled apologetically and said, "Great master, you must be joking. Right now, There are many elite disciples in this square. The one in the second arena was also an elite disciple, but he was actually defeated. That's why this humble one is a bit unhappy. Monk Changgung didn't point it out and continued. Sect leader O is hiding his true abilities. A while ago, the entire Jianghu witnessed the Misty School's generosity. Everyone praised sect leader O for his great talent and bold vision. You created a great situation for the Misty School, and your reputation is comparable to the Dalan Temple. This humble one heard about it, and thus had the opportunity to come to your esteemed sect to witness the new atmosphere of the Misty School. When O Peng heard this, he secretly cursed in his heart. This old bald donkey is really up to no good. He wants to see the strength of my Misty School. Sigh, it seems that my Misty School has no choice but to lose face today. Thus, O Peng hurriedly said, Great Master, you flatter me. My Misty School is only a small sect. How can it be compared to the Dalan Temple, a super sect in the Jianghu? It's just the wild guesses of the ignorant children in the Jianghu. It really can't be taken seriously. Monk Changgung looked at O Peng meaningfully and said, Sect leader O, actually your Misty School and the Dalan Temple have been friends for thousands of years. Although the Misty School is declining, my Dalan Temple has never dared to look down on the Misty School. These words made O Peng's back break out in cold sweat. He repeatedly said that he didn't dare. However, Monk Changgung didn't say much about this. He immediately changed the topic and said, The next match requires Yuan Xing to go on stage. However, the match with him is a bit special. When O Peng heard this, he was puzzled and said, Special? Great Master, please explain. What is that foreshadowing? Can anyone guess it? Please collect it. Thank you. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.